Shia points her staff at the guy in front of her and asks if he's the one who's been kidnapping people, while her whole team stands together, facing off against a dark silhouette at the end of the hall. One of the guys in the group explains that the Royal Knights sent them on a mission to handle the Holy Beast Forest incident, and Shia adds that the whole thing will finally be over once they catch him, as she starts to introduce her squad. Her teammate yells out that this is a massive job for their party, the Lions of the Dawn. But then the story jumps back to 2 months ago, showing a younger girl and a guy before things got crazy. Over a fancy dinner, some guy tells Shia that he's officially breaking off their engagement, and right then the guy shows his true colors, sitting on a couch with 4 different girls all over him. He looks at Shia and says the tradition where a hero has to marry a saint is just the worst, asking for her take on it. Shia just stands there looking miserable, thinking about how she was forced into a marriage she never wanted. The hero just keeps going, calling Shia a plain woman and saying that being with her was nothing but a huge pain. He leans back on the couch with girls all over him, bragging that since he's the hero, he can pick whoever he wants. And as Shia sits there taking the verbal abuse, he makes it clear that their relationship is officially over, which leads to him saying he doesn't need a worthless woman like her around anymore. He gets real close and says he actually doubts Shirette even a real saint at all. And even if she can use some holy magic, he claims he's never actually seen her perform a single miracle. So he pulls Ira close and tells Shia that this girl seems way more like a saint than she ever did. Shia can't believe what she's hearing, thinking to herself about how she actually uses miracles all the time just to keep the hero and his airheaded friends alive despite how bad they are at fighting. And honestly, it's a miracle they're even beating the Demon Lord's army with how dumb they act. The hero gives a fake apology about how things are going. He says he's officially breaking off the engagement because he wants to go enjoy a harem without her. He points a finger right at Shia and yells that she's fired from her job as a saint and kicked out of the party, leaving her standing there in shock while he says he'll handle the king himself. He gives her this cold look and tells her he's going to let the king know that Shia Rafina was nothing but a fake saint after all. Shia just stands there for a second, a vein popping on her head as she realizes how dumb this is, but then she just tells him she'll pack her bags and leave, waving goodbye as she heads out. The hero yells after her, telling her to never show her plain face around him again, which leads to Shia walking alone through the hall, thinking about how she was taken from an orphanage to be the saint, and she was the one who found that guy to begin with. Shia watches the hero walk away and thinks about how he actually did have a lot of talent for his job, but honestly sticking with him was a massive mistake. She looks back at the group with a deadpan stare, realizing she's finally free after a hellish year of putting up with that guy and his obsession with women. As she walks away, she decides she's finally going to do the job she's always actually wanted to do. So she heads back to her room and packs up the few things she owns. Before leaving, she grabs her travel funds straight from the hero's bag, figuring she's earned it as severance pay. She leaves the inn and hops on the fastest carriage she can find to head straight for the royal capital. The ride is quiet as she looks out the window at the passing trees, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement as she tells herself her new life is finally beginning. She stares ahead with a look of total determination for the future. Shia finally makes it to the capital and heads straight for the Adventurers Guild, looking completely focused because she knows exactly what she's here for. She thinks about how the one thing she's always wanted to do is create a guild that's actually cozy, a place that feels more like a family you can trust. She walks up to the counter where a smiling elf receptionist is waiting to help her out. The receptionist slides a card across the desk and tells her to go ahead and accept her new guild card. As Shia looks at it, the lady warns her to be really careful not to lose the thing, since getting a new one made is honestly a huge hassle. Shia's eyes light up as she holds it, barely believing she actually has her own guild card now. The card lists the name as Lions of the Dawn with her as the guild master, even though she's the only member for now. With the paperwork done, she heads over to a real estate office to find a place to set up her new base. Shia sits down at the real estate office and explains that since she's short on cash, she just needs a cheap rental for now, and the clerk is totally on board, telling her she's got a specific spot that would be perfect for her situation. She mentions that the property actually used to be the base for another small guild back in the day, explaining that it's located on the second floor of a 5-story building with other shops taking up the rest of the space. The best part is the price, as the clerk lets her know the rent is only 300 gold, which makes Shia's day, since she realizes the place can double as both her new guild base and her home. Moving on, she manages to get a promise from the intermediary guild to start sending some work her way. But the next big hurdle is actually finding people to join up. She walks through town knowing that since her guild is brand new, she has to be the one to go out and recruit people personally. Shia gets a serious look on her face, planning to use her Saintess powers to see if the people she meets actually have any real potential. Shia starts her search, thinking about how she needs to find people who have good hearts and the kind of raw talent that just needs a little polish. She heads out into the busy streets, keeping a sharp eye on everyone passing by to see if anyone stands out. While she's distracted, a scruffy-looking guy in a vest accidentally slams right into her, catching her totally off guard. The guy doesn't even apologize, just tells her to watch where she's going before he keeps moving through the crowd. Shia stops in her tracks, noticing something strange about the guy as she watches him walk away. Suddenly, her staff starts reacting, and that's when she realizes her Saintess powers are picking up on something. She looks closer and sees a glowing star symbol on the guy's back, a clear sign that he's got the exact potential she's looking for. The guy ducks into a quiet, rundown alleyway, clearly trying to avoid the main crowd while Shia follows behind. Suddenly, a shady girl jumps him from the shadows, telling him he's carrying way too much money for a guy who looks so scrawny. The guy isn't taking it though, he snaps back, asking her who she thinks she's calling scrawny. The scruffy guy is totally losing it, shaking like crazy and wondering how he even got caught as Shia stands behind him, calmly explaining that she put a magic tracker on him to follow him here. But the shady girl just laughs from the side, telling Shia she made a mistake letting her guard down. The thief tells the guy there's no way she's giving the wallet back, offering a fake apology while she gets interrupted by Shia. She tells the girl goodnight as her staff glows, leaving the guy completely confused. It's just a basic sleep spell, and within seconds the thief is face down on the ground, totally out cold. Shia looks back over her shoulder, acting like she's just a weak little girl who should probably get out of this creepy alleyway before things get any worse. The scruffy guy isn't moving though, he's looking pretty beat up and starts yelling to get his things back. He's clearly desperate, shouting about how that's the money he actually worked hard to earn. The guy with the headband laughs, yelling that money belongs to whoever has it, and calling the scruffy guy an idiot for thinking he can get it back. He stands there clutching the bag, daring the guy to try and take it if he's got the guts. Shia doesn't say a word, she just looks down at a plain rubber ball in her hands with a really intense look. She winds her arm back for a massive throw, calmly saying, "Oh my," like she's about to do something totally normal. The ball flies across the alley and slams right into the guy's face, making a loud sound as his partner just watches, completely losing it. Both guys are confused, and the scruffy guy can't believe he was just saved by a literal rubber ball. Shia just stands there with a scary look in her eyes, telling them she's just a lovely maiden passing through, but the two thugs aren't buying it at all. They're shaking in their boots, shouting back to ask which part of her is supposed to be lovely. The sound of a serious beatdown echoes out of the alleyway and up into the city sky. Shia stands over the guys who are now out cold, asking the scruffy guy if she's weak and adorable since she needed magic to win. Shia hands the bag back, telling the guy to try and keep it away from weirdos next time. He takes it with shaking hands, whispering a quick thanks, but when he mentions not needing any gorillas around, Shia's vibe shifts. She tells him if he says one more word, her nice heart is going to turn into a demon's instantly, leaving the guy crying as he clutches his money. Shia just watches him, telling him it's good that he's finally being honest about how he feels. He looks at the bag with a small smile, saying that with this amount, he can at least afford to eat some bread crusts, which confuses Shia. She looks at him and asks why he wouldn't just buy something better to eat than just crusts. The scruffy guy looks down, explaining that you can't even buy a single slice of bread with just 10 gold, and Shia absolutely loses it. She yells out the amount in total shock, asking if that's really all the money he got for all that hard work. The guy just looks at her, confirming that he worked his tail off just to get those 10 gold pieces. Shia is completely floored, shouting that even the most basic day laborers get at least 100 gold for their time, leading her to demand to know what kind of shady business scammed him out of his money like that. The scruffy guy looks down, explaining that he's just a vagrant with no home anyway. He just sighs and says it can't be helped, looking like he's totally given up on things. But then he remembers his manners and says he should probably give Shia a reward, asking if 3 gold is enough for returning his bag, which leaves Shia looking completely speechless. Shia finally speaks up, telling the young man to just put that tiny bit of money away. She tells him to follow her and keep his mouth shut, so the guy just trails behind her as they walk through the quiet city streets together. Eventually, they stop right in front of a massive 3-story building. The guy looks around the place, totally confused, and asks where they even are, which leads Shia to explain that this is the home base for her guild, the Lions of the Dawn. Shia decides that the first thing they need to do is get him treated, so she uses her magic to heal him up before grabbing some ingredients to start on the next step, which is making some food while the guy watches. He just stares at the plate of hot food she puts down in front of him, as Shia explains that she made him some tarraco pasta and egg soup. She puts her hands together and happily says it's finally time to eat, but notices he isn't moving, so she asks what's wrong and if he's even hungry. The guy looks pretty tense and tells her that he definitely is hungry, but he's just not the kind of guy to eat a meal from a total stranger, which makes Shia realize she might have messed up her approach a little. Shia pouts a bit and agrees that honestly, nothing is more suspicious than getting a free handout, so she starts eating it herself to prove it isn't poisoned or part of some human trafficking plot. She jokes that he might have poison resistance so he shouldn't eat it, but he's already digging in, which leads to Shia just yelling at him to stop complaining and finish the meal. The guy takes a bite and realizes it's actually amazing, quietly admitting that the food is good. Shia watches him eat with a smile and mentions she actually made this for the hero once, too, but that guy just called it cheap crap and threw it in the trash right in front of her. Even though it's a sad memory, seeing someone enjoy her cooking makes her feel so happy, so she finally introduces herself as Shia, and the guy tells her his name is Luke. Luke explains he doesn't have a family name because he's just a street urchin. Shia sips her tea and thinks to herself that Luke doesn't seem like a bad guy, so she decides to use her holy maiden power to check out his hidden talents. A status window pops up showing Luke has insane potential. His sword skills can go from F all the way to S, and seeing those crazy numbers makes Shia completely lose it and spray her tea everywhere. She's internally screaming about his unbelievable talent for effort while Luke just asks if she's doing alright. The screen shows even more growth for his magic and bow skills, but the real kicker is his personality is a perfect S rank, which is the most impressive thing on the whole list. Shia is still coughing from the spit take when Luke suddenly asks if she wants him to work there, since he's pretty sure this place is supposed to be an adventurer's guild, right? He looks her over and asks if she's a cleric, even though she doesn't really look the part. Shia admits that she wouldn't exactly call herself a cleric, so Luke naturally asks why she's even trying to recruit him. He reminds her that he's just a homeless guy with no education or any kind of official record to his name. Shia gets a bit nervous, thinking he'd never believe her if she told him she's a saint who can see his true potential. But she knows that isn't the only reason she wants him around. She tells him that she doesn't think just anyone could have done what he did, which leaves Luke totally confused. She brings up how he wanted to repay her for saving him and asks him if he remembers that, making him listen as she mentions how he gave her money from a wallet that was already almost empty. It was money for his own meals, and she points out that giving that up usually means starving or worse. So even if it was a little reckless, she tells him she thought it was a really amazing thing to do. Shia admits that while his kindness is great, it also makes her worry, telling him he's only survived this long because he's careful and has had some crazy luck. She looks down, honestly saying she's just scared he might end up dead someday, which leads into her explaining how she just started a brand new guild and needs members. She looks at him and asks if that's a good enough reason for him to join up. Luke gets confused and points out that most guilds usually have strict rules for joining, mentioning how he's heard you need to be rich or have some insane combat stats. Shia doesn't back down and confirms that her guild definitely has a requirement, so Luke starts to freak out, telling her he's got zero cash and no special abilities at all. Shia just smiles at him, saying her guild only has one real requirement to get in. Shia tells him the only rule is to swear he'll treat guild members like family. Luke just stands there looking completely floored by the idea. Shia gets a little impatient and tells him to stop acting surprised. She wants a straight answer on whether he's going to swear or not. Luke stays quiet for a moment, just staring at her while he processes how serious she's being about all this. He suddenly yells out that he swears to do it. Shia just smiles and promises she'd never turn her back on anyone either, which makes her say that if he's serious, then he's officially part of the team starting right now. She starts clearing the table with a big grin, telling him they'd be happy to have him on board whenever he's ready. As she heads toward the kitchen, Luke watches her go and asks if she's actually sure about picking a guy like him, but Shia just looks back at him and says that's the whole point. She's picking him exactly because he is Luke. She looks him right in the eyes, making it clear she chose him for who he is and nothing else, leaving Luke finally giving in and asking her to let him join the guild if she's really willing to have him. The sun comes up over the city buildings, marking the start of a brand new day. Shia gets breakfast ready and greets Luke with a warm good morning as she puts the food out. Luke just stands in the doorway looking totally frozen, so Shia looks back and asks him what's wrong. He starts getting all choked up, saying how crazy it feels to wake up to good smells, and a friendly greeting. Tears start hitting his eyes as he tells her the whole experience is just amazing. Shia realizes she has to provide for two people now, watching him finally sit down to eat. As she watches Luke scarf down his meal, she thinks about how she needs to start making more money right away, so they start looking over some work and the idea of slime hunting comes up. They check a list of jobs including guarding scholars and gathering herbs in the forest, but Shia looks at the options and asks if taking out the slimes is actually the hardest job they've got. Shia explains that they are definitely going to end up fighting enemies, and tells him that is exactly why everything is going to be fine. She breaks down the plan, saying they'll fight monsters first to get experience, promising that once they get some real practice, those other jobs will be easy. Luke admits that even though he can use a sword, he's actually really weak, mentioning how he's honestly better at just using his fists instead. Shia still suggests the sword, telling him it's the best way to get stronger, but Luke can't help but feel like things won't really go that smoothly. Even with his doubts, he looks her in the eye and says he won't give up, so Shia cheers him up, promising to find a teacher since he's got talent. Luke decides that if Shia is so sure about the plan, he'll just trust her, so they head to the counter where the elf receptionist gets everything ready. Luke stares at his new card in total shock, while Shia tries not to laugh, as they leave the city behind and start walking down a quiet forest path. Shia gives him some basic advice, telling him to just focus on slashing any slimes, promising that she'll handle all the complicated stuff like shield buffs and healing. Luke asks if she really is just a healer, which makes things a bit awkward, since she can only give him a vague answer about what she actually does. She admits that she can still use her saint miracles despite losing her title, but warns him that those powers could vanish anytime, so he needs to keep training. Luke and Shia hear a loud rustling coming from the nearby bushes as a pair of slimes pop out. Luke looks surprised while Shia points out their target. She gets hyped up and tells Luke to go ahead and slice them up, so she starts her magic, calling out that she's giving him an attack power boost. Luke gets himself pumped up and says it's time to do this, even though he's sweating, swinging his sword and cutting straight through both of the slimes at once. He's totally out of breath after the move, wiping sweat off his face while Shia leans back and explains that taking down more enemies means a much bigger reward. She gives him a big smile and says their goal for the day is 100 of them, which leaves Luke standing there completely drained as a massive swarm of slimes starts closing in. Luke is losing it, calling Shia a total demon while he hacks away at the slimes. 4 hours go by and the guy is face down in the dirt, saying he's pretty much dead. Shia tells him he isn't going anywhere as long as she's there, then uses her staff to cast a heal spell that wraps right around him. Luke is shocked and asks if the magic actually fixed his stamina too, and Shia just thinks to herself that it makes sense since it's the power of a saint. She looks at the pile of monsters and says they hit 60 instead of 100, which makes Luke start swinging his sword like a maniac, saying he finally gets how it works. Shia sees his eyes are going hollow from all the killing, so she decides it's time to go, ending the training session with a cute wink and a peace sign. Luke looks totally out of it after all that work, but a notification pops up showing his sword talent actually went from F to E. Shia is pretty happy with the progress and says the next move is to get him a real sword instructor. Luke just stands there in the back, looking like he's about to collapse while she keeps explaining how the whole cycle works, telling him they'll just keep practicing to raise his level even more. Later on, they head into town where a guy sees them and calls out to Shia, asking her how everything has been going lately. They walk up to the counter to talk to him, and Shia gives him a friendly greeting, calling him Mr. Geo. Turns out this guy is from the Soaring Pegasus Mediation Guild, and he's been helping her out with things, so Shia introduces her new friend to him, letting him know the kid's name is Luke. She doesn't stop there though, she proudly tells Geo that Luke is officially the very first member of her new guild. Moving on to business, she explains they're actually there to report that they finished culling all those slimes. Geo gives her a warm smile, telling her it sounds like she really found a good person to join her journey. Mr. Geo gives them a friendly smile while holding some paperwork. He says he's going to show them how to report their work and get their money. He explains that they just need to bring the request form and the guild card over to the counter whenever they finish a job, and goes on to mention how the guild card is pretty useful. It actually keeps a record of every monster they defeat. He grabs Luke's card to check the numbers, saying he's going to see how they did on their first run. Luke looks a bit stunned as Mr. Geo reads off the total. Turns out they took down 60 slimes in one go. He starts doing the math out loud, telling them that slimes pay out 5 gold for every kill they get. When he says the final total is 300 gold, Luke's eyes start sparkling and his face gets all red from the excitement. The kid is totally hyped up with his fists clenched. He asks if they really get to keep that much money for just one job. Mr. Geo explains that monster hunting pays way better than regular work since it's actually dangerous, so Shia looks over at Luke with a smile, asking him if he wants to wrap things up here or if they should keep going. Shia smiles and tells Mr. Geo that they're going to keep going because she really wants Luke to get some actual training. But she also asks if he knows any good sword instructors for the kid, which leaves Luke looking pretty confused. Mr. Geo thinks about it for a second and says they don't have anyone on staff, but he knows a guy he can recommend. He mentions the guy is always busy, so they'll probably have to work around a very specific schedule, but Shia doesn't care about that at all, and she excitedly tells him that it's totally fine and begs for the intro. Mr. Geo agrees and starts writing a letter of introduction for them right there at his desk. He finishes up and tells Shia she needs to take the paper directly to the knight's station at the palace, but Shia completely freaks out. She starts to say thanks, but then realizes she has to go to the actual royal palace. Mr. Geo ignores the shock and starts explaining exactly who Luke is going to be training with, revealing the guy is actually Ivar's tailor, a legendary member of the Royal Palace Guard. Mr. Geo finishes his explanation by mentioning the guy is also known as the Black Hawk Knight, which makes Luke start sweating, asking if this guy isn't a little too famous for him, while Shia wonders if he's really that big of a deal. Mr. Geo brings up the legend about him taking down 10,000 soldiers all by himself, and Luke just stands there completely losing it, barely able to process the idea of one guy fighting that many people. Shia starts thinking back to how this instructor used to train the hero, but he was so intense that the hero actually ran away from the lessons. Even though he had that reputation, she remembers him being a pretty nice and easygoing guy back then. Still, looking at the kid, she can't help but wonder if he's actually going to be okay. But Luke gets this really serious look and tells her he definitely wants to meet the guy. Shia asks if he's for real, and he says a legendary knight like that could definitely show him how to find a great master. He's decided that if he's going to do this, he's going all in so he can get strong enough to actually help the guild. Shia looks at the kid and gets all emotional, saying that's exactly what she'd expect from someone who works as hard as he does. Luke is totally hyped now and says they should definitely go through with getting introduced to that legendary master. But then he looks back and suggests they should probably just head home and get some sleep for now. As they get back, they both stop in their tracks, spotting something weird right outside their place. Shia notices there's a person just sitting on the ground right in front of the guild house door, and as they get closer, a young girl looks up at them with these really big, nervous eyes. She sounds pretty unsure of herself when she asks if this place is actually the guild. The girl introduces herself as Lena, looking a little bit flustered as she talks to them, fidgeting with her bag, while she explains she's looking for the guild's help to find someone. She mentions she doesn't have any actual money for a reward, so she starts reaching into her bag to show them what she has instead. Lena holds out a handful of candy and snacks, saying she wants to use them as payment, and since she thinks it's not enough, she keeps piling more and more sweets into Shia's arms. Shia is caught off guard by the candy and tries to get the girl's attention, calling her Lena, but the girl starts tearing up, begging them to help find someone. Shia feels a total pang of guilt, so she says she'll help, but then she asks the kid if she really came out here all alone. Luke steps up behind them and asks where her mom and dad are, since she's just a kid and she holds up a sketchbook, admitting she doesn't know anything about her father at all. She shows them a really simple drawing of a person and tells them that it's her mother. Luke looks at her, trying to confirm if her mom is actually the person she's looking for, and the girl looks down sadly, explaining that her mom has gone missing. Luke rubs the back of his head and admits that they've landed in a pretty rough spot, and he points out that a missing person case like this is usually something for the knights, not a guild. As soon as he says that, Lena's eyes go wide and she starts sweating like she's panicking, yelling out that no knights are allowed to be part of this. Shia and Luke look totally shocked, but the girl just grips her dress tight and says if the knights find her mom, they're going to kill her. She tells them that's the big reason why they can't mention any of this to the authorities, and then she explains how she tried asking other guilds for help, but they all said candy wasn't enough. She looks down at the floor, sounding completely desperate as she says this guild is her last resort, leaving Shia and Luke completely speechless by the heavy stuff this little kid is dealing with. Lena drops to her knees and bows her head all the way to the floor, begging them for their help. Luke quickly tries to get Lena to stand up, telling her she's getting her clothes all dirty, and Shia looks totally flustered, asking where a little kid even learns to bow like that. Lena just keeps crying, desperately begging the two of them to find her mother, and she promises she'll pay them back for everything once she's successful and working in the Flower City. Luke looks at Shia and says he just can't leave her like this. She agrees, saying she knows. Shia pulls the girl into a warm hug and tells her to look up for a second, and then she promises that the Lions of the Dawn will definitely accept her request. Lena looks up with tears still streaming down her face, asking if they're really sure about this. The sound of Shia's voice carries outside as she tells the girl to leave it all to them, before she finally suggests they all head inside the building so they can get some rest. Lena sits up straight and says she knows she's inexperienced, but she's happy to be in their care, but Shia notices something weird on the floor and asks the girl what it is. Lena explains that it's just a sleeping bag, which catches Shia completely off guard, as the girl insists she won't be any trouble since she's fine just sleeping on the floor. Shia stays quiet for a second, looking down at the kid with a pretty heavy look on her face. Then she pats the spot right next to her on the bed and tells Lena to come over, asking the girl to just come and sleep there in the bed with her instead. Lena looks up at her, eyes wide and getting all sparkly from the offer, and she gets a little choked up while asking Shia if she's really sure it's actually okay. Shia just gives her a warm smile and pulls back the covers to let the girl in. Shia gets settled into bed with the little girl and says it's time to get some sleep. So she mentions that tomorrow is going to be a busy day since she has to find her mother and stop by the palace. Lena looks up at her and asks about the royal palace, sounding pretty surprised by the whole thing. So Shia explains that she just has some business to take care of with the knights over there. Seeing the kid look a bit worried, Shia quickly promises she'll keep Lena's presence a secret so she doesn't have to worry. Lena relaxes and says she believes in her, calling Shia Big Sis with a tired smile as the long day finally catches up to her and she drifts off into a deep sleep. Shia stays awake for a bit just watching her and thinks the kid looks like a total angel when she's resting. But then she notices something off about the girl's arm and leans in to get a closer look at Lena's wrist. She pulls back the sleeve and realizes the poor kid is covered in dark bruises. Shia looks down at the girl's arms and can't believe how many marks there are, realizing the way Lena has been acting makes a lot more sense now. Seeing all those bruises everywhere makes Shia's expression go dark, and she decides right then that she's going to have a very serious talk with the kid's mother. The next morning, a horse carriage rolls through the cobblestone streets as Lena looks out at the city, totally losing it because she thinks the whole thing is amazing. She points at the carriage and calls it a horse box, so Luke asks if this is her first time riding in one, and she happily tells him it is. The carriage eventually pulls up to the massive gates of the royal palace, but the huge building starts to freak Lena out, so Shia leans in to tell her everything will be okay. Inside the royal palace, the long hallways are quiet and completely empty as Vice Commander Ivars stands there and tells Shia it's been a while. So Shia greets him back from the couch where the whole group is sitting together. She makes sure to mention right away that she isn't a saintess anymore, and Ivars closes his eyes, admitting the king already told him a bit about the situation. Shia gives off a really creepy smile while saying she has a ton of things to discuss, making Luke look pretty worried. They sit down for some tea and snacks while they start catching up on everything. As they talk, Ivars gets more and more heated until he just snaps about the hero, gritting his teeth and telling the guy to go to hell because he's so fed up. Shia just calmly sips her tea and agrees that the hero is a total disappointment, leaving Luke sitting there in shock. The news hits the room hard as Lena asks if Shia is really the saint, but Shia just takes a sip of tea and casually mentions she's actually a former one, leaving the little girl looking completely floored. Luke is just as stunned, explaining that the saint never actually showed up for the hero's big debut ceremony, so people just assumed she was some super modest person who stayed out of the spotlight. Lena looks a bit annoyed by the rumors and asks what that's even supposed to mean, while Luke sits there trying to process how the legendary saint is sitting right in front of him. She reveals that she was actually at that ceremony too, but her job was just scattering flower petals in the background while the hero soaked up all the attention. And looking back at the memory of the hero acting all flashy on the balcony, she admits it's a part of her past she'd honestly rather just forget. Ivars rubs his forehead in total stress, admitting that even though the hero is a disappointing piece of trash, the guy's actual talent with a blade is the real deal. He explains that as things are now, they can't even force the guy to quit being the hero, unless a stronger warrior comes along and breaks that holy sword of his. Shia gets a confident look on her face and tells Ivars she might actually be able to solve that specific problem for him. So she starts explaining her plan while Luke just sits there with a question mark over his head, totally confused about where this is going until she drops a massive claim, telling them that in her estimation, Luke is going to grow up to be an S-rank swordsman. Ivars is completely blown away by Shia's claim, looking like he can't believe what he just heard as he stammers in confusion, while Shia calmly explains that there's a real possibility the holy sword might actually choose Luke. She points out that since nobody really knows how the sword picks a hero, she can't be 100% sure, but she knows the chance is definitely there. Luke looks a bit overwhelmed by the whole idea, wondering what any of this has to do with him since he thought they only came here to pitch his potential to Vice Captain Ivars in the first place. He reminds her that the training can't even get off the ground until they get Ivars to set him up with a teacher. As he speaks, Luke clenches his hand over his chest, thinking about how he owes Shia more than he can say for taking in a stray like him and giving him a place where he finally feels like he belongs. He gets this look of total fire in his eyes, declaring that it doesn't even matter if he has some legendary power or not because he's determined to get stronger no matter what, just so he can be useful to the guild he now considers his family. Shia gets all choked up after hearing Luke's speech, thinking about what a great kid he turned out to be as Ivars finally gives in and agrees to help them, making the whole group light up with relief. He warns them that he isn't going to set Luke up with some random amateur teacher and asks if they're truly ready for the challenge, which Luke and Shia immediately confirm as they stand outside the palace. Once they're back out on the street, Shia makes sure to thank Lena for coming along with them and suggests they get moving so they can finally start looking for the little girl's missing mom. As they walk through the busy market, Lena brings up the vice commander they just met, still wondering if that guy is actually safe to be around or if he's just as scary as he looks. Shia just smiles and tells her he's not scary at all, even if he does have a bit of a rough face, because the truth is he's a total sweetheart who secretly loves anything cute. Lena shows off the gift she got, mentioning that the vice captain even gave them cookies to take home for later. She looks down a bit sad and admits she always grew up thinking knights were just scary monsters, but her expression gets even darker as she remembers her mom saying she'd be killed if she ever got caught. Shia gets a bit confused by that because she knows knights don't usually just kill people for no reason, so she starts wondering if Lena's mom only said those things to keep her daughter from getting close to the guard. Lena looks up and tells them both that they're really good people, and she even admits that the scary vice captain is actually a pretty good guy too. Shia starts to ask more about her mother to get to the bottom of things, but before she can finish her thought, Lena spots something in the crowd and suddenly bolts at full speed. Shia watches the little girl run off and asks what's wrong, but she's already disappearing into the market. Lena calls back to the group while running away, telling them they all have a beautiful golden sparkle. But then she adds that her own mother is pitch black and muddy, which really catches Shia off guard. As they walk through the market, the kid points out a grumpy guy at a stall and says he's all muddy too. Then she points to a nice lady carrying some bread, saying that she's the one who's actually sparkling, which makes Shia stop and really look closer at what the girl is seeing. She checks the stats on the grumpy guy first and notices his personality is sitting at a low E rank. Next, she looks at the lady with the bread and sees her personality is actually a perfect S rank. It clicks for Shia right then. The big difference between the people Lena's calling out is just their personality, meaning the murky vibes are just low ranks while the sparkling ones are at the top of the scale. She finally gets what's going on and realizes the kid has been reading people's true nature this whole time. Shia looks down at the little girl and starts to speak. Realizing something big is going on, she asks Lena straight up if she has the power to see the inner auras of the people around them. Lena gets this really sad look on her face and mentions how Shia's colors and her mom's color were just totally different from each other, like they weren't even the same thing. She looks at them and says they're clearly good people, but that realization starts to hurt because it means her own mom is the opposite. She starts crying while saying her mom isn't like them at all. She finally lets it out, sobbing that her mommy might actually be a bad person. Shia doesn't say a word, she just stands there with tears running down her face until the kid asks if she's okay. Instead of explaining, Shia just pulls the little girl into a tight hug to comfort her, holding her close and gently telling Lena that everything is going to be okay. Shia looks Lena right in the eye and tells her that they're going to go find her mother together. She explains that when they find her, Lena needs to be brave enough to say what's on her mind. The little girl looks pretty shaken up, just repeating the idea of actually telling her mom how she feels. Luke leans in with a kind smile to help out, promising Lena that the two of them have her back, and Shia backs him up, joking that she'll even give the woman a piece of her mind if she has to. Lena wipes her eyes and thanks them, but she knows this is ultimately her own problem to solve. As they start walking, Lena makes a promise to herself to do her best to talk to her mother, even saying she'll warn her that if she keeps doing bad things, they're going straight to the knights. While they walk, Ivars and his squad of knights move through the streets looking completely serious. Eventually, the group stops in front of an inn with an owl sign where Lena has been staying. Shia, Luke, and Lena step inside the building, but Shia can't help noticing the inn is dark and looks pretty rundown, so she asks Lena if her mom doesn't actually have a house here in the capital. The little girl explains that they don't have a permanent home because her mom has to move around for work so much, and as they walk past the front desk, the guy working there gives them a grumpy look without saying a word. Heading up the stairs, Shia starts getting a really bad vibe about the kids' living situation, and then they reach the top and slowly creak the door to the room open. Shia and Luke both freeze in the doorway, completely shocked by what they're looking at, but Lena just walks right in, happily showing off all the stuffed animals and toys her mom bought for her. She tells them her mom gave her all these things so she wouldn't feel lonely while she stays home by herself, leaving Shia totally speechless and heartbroken for the kid, while Luke just quietly nods and says he gets it. The group heads back out to the city streets, and Shia asks Lena if this is the spot where they got separated since she wanted to start asking the locals for info right away. But things aren't going exactly as planned because the drawing Lena made of her mom is just a basic stick figure that nobody would ever recognize, making the little girl protest that she thinks the sketch looks exactly like her mom. Shia realizes they need something better, so she asks Lena if her mom has any specific features she can describe, while she grabs a pencil and offers to try drawing a proper portrait herself. Lena starts explaining that her mom has blonde hair just like hers, while Luke watches Shia work with a lot of interest. After a bit of effort, Shia finishes up and feels pretty good about how the drawing turned out, so Luke wonders if Shia actually has some secret artistic talent he didn't know about. He leans in and asks her to show him the finished product so he can see it for himself. Shia finally finishes her drawing and shows it off with a big ta-da. But the portrait is a total mess with a super goofy face that leaves Luke and Lena standing there in complete silence. Luke can't believe what he's seeing while he tells Shia straight up that her drawing isn't really any better than the stick figure Lena made earlier, so Shia freaks out and asks him if he's kidding, but Luke doesn't back down at all. He explains that the only reason she thinks it looks okay is because she's the one who drew it, but to anyone else, it's just a bunch of random lines. Since they're getting nowhere, Luke says it can't be helped and offers to try drawing the mom himself. Shia just stands there pouting in the back while Luke starts working the pencil like a pro. He's moving so fast that he finishes in record time and asks them if his version looks anything like the person they're searching for. He acts all humble about it, saying he never really learned how to draw and isn't sure if it's any good. But it turns out the portrait is actually an amazing professional sketch. Lena is totally blown away by the drawing, saying Luke is amazing and that it looks exactly like her mom, but Shia just stands there looking completely defeated. Luke notices her reaction and starts teasing her, asking why on earth she sounds so disappointed with how things turned out. Shia turns her head away and tries to play it cool, pouting as she claims she isn't frustrated about his drawing being better even though it's obvious she is. Since they finally have a solid picture to show around, the group decides they can officially start searching for Lena's mother in town. They start asking around, and a guy in a cap recognizes the lady in the sketch immediately. He mentions he saw her with the little girl before, so Shia holds up the drawing for more people to see, but the guy tells them he has no idea where she went after that specific time. Another guy mentions that she's a real beauty, and he usually sees her walking around town with all kinds of different men, leaving the group to keep searching until an older lady tells them she definitely sees the woman around a lot, though she doesn't know anything specific. A girl eating some food adds that come to think of it, she hasn't actually seen the woman anywhere today, which is when Luke, Shia, and Lena all jump in surprise as a voice from the side suddenly calls out to them. A couple of knights show up, and the dark-haired one mentions that it looks like the group is searching for the little girl's mother. He looks at them pretty closely, asking if this search is actually official guild business or just something they're doing on their own. Shia is caught off guard seeing actual knights standing right in front of her, feeling a bit intimidated by their presence. As one of them starts to walk off, Shia realizes she can't really explain Lena's whole situation to them very easily, so she calls out to the blonde one, addressing him as Sir Bernard to get his attention as he turns back. He looks back with a calm, handsome face, standing there like he's a hero. Bernard walks over to the group and greets Shia, saying it's been a long time since they last ran into each other. The dark-haired knight looks totally confused by the interaction and asks his captain if he actually knows who this girl is. Bernard gives a vague answer, saying you could say he knows her, which only makes the other guy more curious about how they actually met, though Bernard is quick to point out that it isn't any kind of weird relationship. Bernard clarifies things for his curious partner, explaining that Shia actually helped him out a lot in the past, so he decides to take over from here and handle the situation himself. Shia starts to explain the situation regarding the little girl and her missing mother, but Bernard cuts in to ask his subordinate if he isn't supposed to be on patrol right now, making the guy nervous as he confirms he is. The captain looks over at the group and notes that it really does seem like something big is going on. He turns to Shia and asks if she'd be willing to fill him in on the details, though Shia gives a quick apology, explaining she has an appointment and asking if he could just do her a favor and let them go. Bernard stops to think for a second, saying that since it's her, it shouldn't be an issue, but he gives her a heads up that things have been pretty dangerous lately, so she shouldn't do anything reckless no matter how strong she is. Relieved to be in the clear, Shia gives him a big smile and thanks him for the help. Bernard stops for a second and asks Shia what she meant by saying things have been dangerous lately. He explains that it seems like a ton of smugglers have been flooding into the royal capital, and all these shady people are making the whole area unsafe for the citizens living there. Shia finally gets why there are so many night patrols everywhere, but then Bernard changes the topic to ask her something personal. He mentions hearing a rumor that she was fired from her job as the saint, something Shia realizes he already knew. Since he used to be her guard, he says he was worried about her, even though he can basically guess what happened. He just smiles and says that Trash Hero is probably going to end up getting assassinated someday anyway. He tells the group they likely won't deal with the smugglers, but they should still be careful just in case, which makes Shia a bit nervous. Bernard waves them off and says goodbye as he walks away, leaving the three of them watching him go. Lena looks totally impressed with the knight, blushing as she asks if that man was actually a prince. Lena is still totally starstruck by the night, but Shia just gives a tired smile and says the guy is actually pretty disappointing. Lena won't hear it though, insisting he was amazing and super sparkly, while Luke just slumps over looking completely crushed and Shia gets confused and asks what his problem is, which makes Luke finally snap and yell out that he just needs to go clean himself up before they go any further. He's looking like a total mess and says he has to do something about his crazy hair because to him, looking cool is basically the same thing as being strong. Shia tells him to just calm down already as he stands there shaking from the stress of it all. She tries to explain that looking cool doesn't actually make you stronger, and that Bernard is just a weird exception, which leads to her telling Luke to just go take care of his business so they can finally move out, and he nervously agrees. Once he's back, Luke apologizes to Lena for the holdup and says they should get right back to searching for her mother. Lena reaches up and starts patting Luke on the head, playfully telling him what a good boy he is. Luke gets all flustered and blushes as she keeps going, telling him he looks just as cool as a night prince. Shia smiles and thanks Lena for the kind words, while Luke just beams like a weight's been lifted off his shoulders. The three of them head out into the crowded streets, moving through the market with the sketch of Lena's mom. Shia starts showing the drawing to everyone they pass, asking a local man if he's seen the woman before. They split their focus and ask around at different stalls, with Luke and Shia both trying to get any kind of lead. As they keep walking past the festival decorations, Shia starts to feel like something about the whole situation is strange. Lena grips Shia's hand tightly, admitting that even though she's still really worried about being without her mom, she's actually just really happy to be with them right now, her eyes tearing up even though she's smiling. Shia looks down at the little girl and tells her it's not weird at all to feel that way while they keep moving. Shia keeps walking with the kids through the festival crowd, gently telling Lena that it's not weird to feel that way while they continue weaving through the busy market stalls and people filling up the street. Suddenly, Lena stops in her tracks and looks over at a dark opening between the buildings. Shia yells out Lena's name as the little girl suddenly bolts away, dashing toward the alleyway like she's seen a ghost. Shia calls out for her to wait a minute, but Lena doesn't slow down, disappearing fast into the shadows. Shia catches up and asks what happened so suddenly, but Lena just looks completely locked in on something ahead. Luke and Shia stand there totally confused, waiting for her to say something. Lena finally starts to speak, her voice trailing off as she points. She shouts that her mom was just there, pointing further down the path while the others try to scan the area. Lena doesn't hesitate and tells them to follow her this way, leading the group deeper into the backstreets. Shia looks down the narrow path, wondering if her mom really headed down there as they keep up the chase. The group follows the path deep into the backstreets, eventually reaching the end of the line near a building. Shia peeks around the corner and sees a dead end, wondering if the people they're looking for actually went inside. There's nothing there but a set of heavy, arched wooden doors blocking the way forward. Luke doesn't hesitate and steps up to the front, looking ready for a fight while Shia and Lena watch from behind. Shia calls out that it's dangerous, but Luke is already kneeling by the door to get a better read on the situation. He looks back at Shia, who's clearly freaking out, and he calmly asks her what's wrong as he holds up a hand to listen closely, telling her that there are 5 people currently inside. Luke goes into detail, saying it's 4 men and 1 woman, with 1 big muscular guy and a few skinny ones, leaving Shia and Lena completely floored that he can tell all that just by listening. Luke explains that in the slums, you have to watch out for knights and traffickers, and tells them it was just a skill he had to learn to tell people's footsteps apart if he wanted to stay safe. Luke checks the entrance and lets them know the door is locked, but he can pick it. Shia and Lena are both totally impressed, looking at him with stars in their eyes as Shia tells him he's amazing. Luke just plays it cool, explaining that being a vagabond means you die pretty fast without learning a few tricks. So he turns the focus back to the task at hand and asks Shia what the plan is. Just then, voices from nearby catch their attention, with someone asking if the place they're looking for is around there. A knight confirms the intel is good, saying they have to find the hideout to round up all the smugglers. Shia watches from the shadows as the leader orders his squad to search the area and flush everyone out immediately. She starts to worry, thinking that if the knights find Lena's mother first, there won't be any chance for them to talk. But she locks in with a look of total determination and tells herself they just have to make it happen. Shia looks over at the others and tells them she's actually got an idea for how to handle this. Shia, Luke, and Lena all throw on white sheets to look like ghosts. Shia tells everyone it's time to go, but Luke isn't exactly feeling the plan and starts panicking, saying this whole ghost disguise thing is definitely not okay. Shia tells him it's fine because holy magic has special spells for this. She calls out her concealment magic, and the group is suddenly surrounded by glowing sparkles as the spell takes hold. Luke is completely shocked, saying he literally can't see a thing anymore. As they sneak past a wall, Shia explains she's masking their voices too, but tells them to keep it down. They manage to crack a door open and slip inside, while a guy sitting right there doesn't suspect a thing. Shia gets into position and starts a soft chant, telling the guys to remember their mother's voices and warmth. She hits them with sleep magic, telling them to drift off peacefully, and the two guys just completely zonk out. The guard starts to feel the spell hitting him. He lets out a confused sound as his eyes go heavy, and the two of them fall back against the wall, snoring away like babies. Shia and the kids stand over them, having cleared the guards without making any noise. Luke is honestly blown away by the whole thing, telling Shia that magic is incredible and he really wants to learn how to use it too. He looks over at Lena and says he wishes she could use magic as well, so she could join in on the fun. Shia gets thoughtful and decides to check something out, using her appraisal skill to see what the girl is actually capable of. A stat window pops up for Lena showing she's got an F rank in swords, fists, bows, and even magic. But her personality is a straight SSS. Shia is a bit surprised to see she has absolutely zero talent for weapons or magic. But since her personality is maxed out, Shia thinks to herself that the kid is basically a literal angel. Even with those low combat stats, Shia is convinced there's got to be something out there that only Lena can do. She keeps a positive vibe about it, telling herself she's sure the girl has a special talent for something. Luke spots where the others are hiding and tells everyone they're just up ahead. So it's time to move. He leads the way up the stairs, moving quietly to stay hidden. They find the room where the heroes group is just chilling. There's a guy on the couch and a massive dude standing by. Luke gets a look at the muscle-bound guy and admits that one is going to be a real problem for him. Shia tells him it's totally fine because she's going to hit him with an enhancement spell to boost his power. But she gives him a specific instruction, telling him that she wants him to fight hand-to-hand for this battle. She explains the reasoning behind it, mentioning that his sword skills actually aren't his strongest suit yet. Turns out his martial arts talent is way higher, and her magic works a lot better when he's fighting unarmed. Luke takes a second to process that and says he understands, totally down to trust her judgment on this. He gets himself hyped up and ready to charge in, prepared to take on the big guy with just his fists. Luke charges forward with everything he's got, yelling that he's going in as Shia watches from behind. The guys in the room are caught completely off guard, looking totally shocked as the kid rushes them. Shia starts layering her magic on him, hitting him with an attack boost and a defense boost, and then tops it off with a speed boost that sends him flying toward the big guy. Luke lets out a yell and connects with a massive punch right to the muscle-bound guy's face, before turning his momentum on the other guy and sending him crashing backward. Both of them are laid out on the floor, and Luke just stands there looking at his hands. He's stunned by how much power he has while Shia celebrates, saying she actually did it. She doesn't give them a chance to recover, calling out a magic chain spell to pin them down, leaving the two of them tied up back to back and gagged so they can't make a sound. The woman in the room turns around and sees her men tied up on the floor. She's completely blindsided and can barely get a word out as she stands there shaking, holding her head like she's having a total meltdown over the situation. She finally snaps out of it and demands to know who these people are and what they're doing in her place. Shia doesn't blink. She just tells the woman straight up that they're adventurers from the guild, explaining that someone specifically hired them to track her down. She adds that they've basically come to say hello, but the mood in the room is still incredibly tense. Lena peeks out from behind Shia's cloak looking really small and scared as she whispers, "Mom," and the woman stops in her tracks, looking at the kid with a shocked expression as she says Lena's name. But the shock turns into anger fast. The woman starts yelling about how she told her what to do, screaming at the girl for leaving her room, while Shia and Luke just stand there watching this mess unfold. Shia and Luke stand back with Lena as the mother loses it, screaming at the top of her lungs, asking why the girl won't just listen to her. The woman looks completely unstable, covering her face while she goes on about all the stuffed animals and sweets she bought, acting like she's the victim in all this. She stands there in the dark room, leaning in to ask the poor kid if she actually hates her own mother. Lena is crying her eyes out, barely able to whisper a no, but her mom just doubles down, calling her a bad child and a literal curse. The woman keeps muttering to herself about how the girl belongs with her, standing there looking totally broken as she says Rena is with mommy. Everything hits a breaking point when someone finally snaps, yelling for the woman to just shut her mouth already, because the mother is just getting started, baring her teeth and screaming about how the kid needs to stop making so much extra work for her. Luke and Shia have seen enough of this toxic display. They step forward, demanding to know exactly what the woman has been doing here. Shia keeps her cool while looking at the woman, telling her she's already got a pretty good idea of what's been going on in this house. She turns her attention to the guys they tied up earlier, saying she's going to let the smuggler explain everything in his own words. The woman's expression stays cold as she mutters to herself that she's the one who deserves to be happy, looking completely unhinged as she starts spiraling about her miserable birth and upbringing. wondering why her life turned out like this. She yells that she did her absolute best by not killing or abandoning an unwanted child, giving her a bed and toys instead, so she can't understand why she still feels so miserable. Lena can only sob and call out for her mom while the woman snaps at them to shut up, demanding to know why none of them look as miserable as she does. Standing over the tied-up smugglers, she screams at Shia's group, asking how they can possibly smile while she's suffering like this. Lena tries to reach out one more time, quietly calling for her mommy, but the woman is too far gone to listen, so Shia steps up to set the record straight, looking the woman in the eye and telling her the reason is simply because Rihanna is happy. She explains that despite the girl not even knowing her own father, she still found a way to be okay, even though her own mother never gives her any praise and only does things that hurt her, leaving the poor kid crying in a room full of toys. Shia pulls the girl close, looking down at her and saying that even after everything, Rihanna looks up with tears streaming down her face, telling Shia that she still loves her mom. The mother just stands there completely silent as she stares back at the little girl. Suddenly, guards outside start yelling to wait and order a charge upstairs, and Luke looks up at Shia, shouting that the knights are finally breaking into the building right now. Shia panics and tells Rihanna she's sorry but they're out of time and have to run, but the kid stands her ground, shocking Shia by saying she's staying right there with her mommy. She tells her mom that if she did something bad, they'll go and apologize for it together, since she refuses to leave her mother all alone, leaving Luke and Shia totally stunned while Rihanna looks her mother in the eye and repeats that she's not going anywhere. Rihanna stands her ground in the middle of the room, telling everyone that she won't leave her mom alone. Shia and Luke can only watch in shock, with Luke quietly saying the girl's name as he sees how serious she is. Shia looks down, thinking about how she's an orphan who never even knew her parents' faces. She wonders if they just left her behind or if they passed away, and moving on, she thinks about how she knows parents are supposed to be everything to a kid, but she just can't feel that connection herself. Shia admits to herself that she really has no idea what that's like as she looks at Rihanna standing right next to her mother, looking completely determined to stay. Shia grips her staff until her knuckles turn white, thinking that even if she doesn't get it, she can tell for sure that Rihanna isn't just faking it or pushing herself to be brave. Luke notices how focused Shia has become and asks if she's okay, but she's all ready. Shia decides it's time to move, telling Luke they have to go before the knights catch up, but Luke just looks back one last time as they start heading out. They both call out to Rihanna, leaving the little girl standing there with her mom, looking like she's about to cry from everything that just happened. Rihanna waves goodbye to the two of them, calling out thanks to both the lady and the guy, and then she makes sure to tell them how much it meant that she finally got to see her mom again. She starts apologizing for not being able to pay them or thank them the right way, so Shia looks back with a smirk, telling the kid not to worry because she plans on getting paid back eventually. Rihanna is a bit confused by that, but Shia explains that she's going to hold her to that promise, and as the magic starts to kick in, Shia gives a final wave and tells Rihanna she'll see her later. Luke adds that he's definitely coming back to visit too, and just like that, they disappear from the room. Lena's mom calls out her name one last time as they're forced apart, and Lena just cries shouting for her mom while the guards pull her away. She's completely losing it when Shia and Luke finally teleport away, leaving the knights standing in the empty doorway. Back at the inn, a fresh plate of food sits on the table, but the mood is totally dead. Shia tells Luke they should eat, but he just sits there looking dazed until they both start eating in this awkward silence, neither of them saying a single word. Luke finally finishes and stands up, saying thanks for the meal before telling her he's going to go train. Shia just watches him walk off, barely saying a word. A week goes by like this. Shia even gave him a haircut and they've been doing quests, but he's been way too quiet. Shia looks at him and realizes he's probably still pretty angry. Shia thinks to herself that she really can't blame Luke for being so quiet, especially since Lena's mom was just arrested by the knights and is definitely going to prison for a long time. She starts second-guessing everything, wondering if she should have even separated the kid from her mother, worrying that maybe the whole thing was just her own ego talking. She looks back on Lena's determination, realizing it's the girl's own choice, and yet she's pretty sure Luke wants to respect that choice as much as she does. But then she gets stuck in her own head, wondering what she's actually supposed to do now. As she sits alone at the table, she can't help but wonder where Lena is staying at the moment. Even if the girl isn't locked in a cell somewhere, the thought of her being alone has Shia feeling totally worried, wishing she could just reach out to Sir Bernard for some help. The door clicks open, Shia peers through the gap looking totally nervous when she sees Sir Bernard standing there. She shouts his name in shock, but he just gives a casual wave and says hey like it's no big deal. Shia is basically vibrating with nerves, gasping for air as she tries to ask why he's even there. But Bernard just leans in with this intense look and asks her if she wants to go on a little date. Moving on, they're at a cafe where Bernard explains that the Knights use the place sometimes, leaving Luke sitting there feeling like a total third wheel. Bernard tells them it's a safe spot to relax, but Luke can't stop thinking about the fact that the guy called this a date. The Knight takes a slow sip of his tea, finally deciding it's time to get down to business. He casually asks if they know a girl named Lena, which has Shia completely losing it and spitting her tea everywhere while Luke just freezes up. Bernard admits he didn't press the issue at first because he figured Shia was the one behind whatever was happening, noting that she was never the type to go charging into dangerous situations without a good reason. Shia realizes the Knights definitely figured out they were the ones who wrecked the smugglers' hideout, so she just comes clean and admits that Lena was actually their client. She tries to make it sound like a small deal, saying the kid just found her cat and they went their separate ways, but Bernard just stares her down with this intense look, making Shia freak out internally as she tries to keep it together. She keeps the lie going by nervously adding that she hasn't even been paid for the job yet. Bernard isn't buying the act and asks her to just tell him the truth, specifically wanting to know exactly where Lena is hiding out. He takes a second to process everything, just sighing Shia's name like he's completely done with her games, and then he asks if she has any idea how much he's been worrying about her. Shia just stands there blushing, thinking he must have been pretty stressed out to go and ask her on a date like that. Bernard gets serious and tells Shia that this whole situation was way more dangerous than she actually thinks, and he adds that it's honestly a lucky break that they didn't show up. Shia is left wondering who he's talking about, but Bernard just stays silent with a heavy look on his face. She tries to get the conversation back on track by asking if they were still talking about Lena, so Bernard lets her know that the girl is currently being kept safe in the bishop's custody. He tells Shia it's her call whether she wants to see her or not, but he needs to make one thing clear. He looks her dead in the eye and tells her she absolutely cannot look any deeper into the smuggling case, but Shia isn't backing down easily and asks him what he'll do if she decides to keep digging anyway. Bernard doesn't skip a beat and says next time, instead of asking her on a date, he'll just propose, making it official by showing up with a ring and a huge bouquet of roses. Shia looks completely drained after hearing Bernard's weird marriage ultimatum and asks him what kind of threat that's even supposed to be, since a public proposal would just turn every lady who likes him against her. She seriously begs him to stop, so Bernard starts sweating and tries to backpedal, telling her he's only half joking about the whole thing. Shia doesn't let him off the hook though, pointing out that saying he's half joking just means he's actually half serious, but Bernard moves the conversation along, saying he'll come with her to see Lena since he needs to talk to the bishop anyway. The mention of the bishop makes Shia's face go totally flat as she repeats the title to herself, which Bernard catches immediately, noting that she always makes a really specific face whenever the guy's name comes up. Shia tries to act like it's nothing, claiming that her annoyed expression is just her normal everyday face, but Bernard isn't buying it for a second and says it's obvious she's just totally disgusted. The group heads out to the church where crowds are gathered outside. The carriage continues to roll along the cobblestone streets while Luke looks over at Shia and asks her what kind of person this bishop guy really is. Bernard sits back with his arms crossed, thinking that the bishop must be a real piece of work for Shia to hate him this much. But he tells Luke the guy is actually an amazing bishop that everyone ends up worshipping, which just makes Shia look completely disgusted. The carriage finally pulls up near their destination as the sounds of the city get louder. Once they step out, Bernard points out a massive crowd gathered right in front of the cathedral, so he stops a local girl to ask if something happened, making her blush immediately. She tells them that some guy named Jen is having a huge showdown with the bishop right now because the food rations are total garbage. Shia and Bernard both look completely caught off guard by the news, while nearby, Jen is already losing his mind and screaming at the bishop for being a total letdown. Jen points his finger right at the bishop's face and yells that he's officially done with the status quo. Today is the day he gets better food and everything else he's owed. The bishop doesn't even look bothered, just crossing his arms and asking what kind of nonsense this old man is talking about now. He gets right in Jen's face and tells him that free food is the best kind of food, so he should just be a good little boy and finish his porridge. The crowd starts getting hyped, especially an old lady in the front who starts cheering for Jen to go get him. All the older women are totally swooning over the guy, calling him the shining star of the senior community, while a couple of rough-looking guys in the back start screaming for their boss to send the bishop flying with one solid kick. Bernard watches the whole thing from the sidelines, feeling completely confused about why this crowd is just old ladies and guys who look like total bandits, but Luke thinks they look more like pirates, while Shia just stands there looking like she wants to be literally anywhere else. Just then, the guys in the back reveal that Jen is actually the former vice-captain of the Royal Knights as he draws his sword, and with the ladies still cheering him on, he announces his full name is Genzahark Lirios and steps up to be the bishop's opponent. The crowd keeps yelling, and someone shouts for the bishop to stop hiding and say his name too, while Bernard just stands there looking completely lost. Bernard starts looking around and asks where the bishop even is, while Luke and Shia just stand next to him looking like they've seen enough for one day. The bishop turns his back to the crowd and sighs, saying how much of a pain this whole thing is as Jen stands there waiting for the fight to start. The bishop starts this big intro about being a scary pirate who used to wreck the seas, but he trips over his words and admits he messed the line up. He tries again, introducing himself as Bishop Levios, gardener of the Holy Church and a servant of the goddess of whatever, sounding like he barely cares. Bernard is actually horrified by the name, while Luke and Shia just look at the guy with zero belief in anything he's saying. Despite the weird intro, the bishop gets into a stance and tells Jen they should just have a fair fight. Jen swings his sword hard, but the bishop just blocks the hit with his wooden staff like it's nothing. The bishop tells Jen he's actually living up to his old reputation for being a reckless hero as the crowd watches the two of them trade blows. Jen's expression gets serious, and he tells the bishop that even with all that history, he isn't planning on losing today. Jen and the bishop clash with everything they've got, creating a massive flash of light as the crowd just stands there completely stunned, unable to look away for even a second. The two fighters finally back off and create some space while the dust settles around them, and suddenly a guy from the audience raises his hand and yells that the match is a draw. Jen looks pretty bummed out about it, muttering that another draw is frustrating before telling the ladies in the crowd to forgive him, but they don't care at all and start cheering about how cool he is. The bishop just relaxes and fixes his clothes, saying he'll keep the quality and quantity of everything in mind, while telling Jen that his achievements are actually a huge source of energy for everyone watching him. He goes on to say that Jen has been an admirable guy since the very beginning, but then, the bishop looks over and notices the hero's party has arrived, so he suggests they should probably finish up. The crowd is still hyped up after the match, surrounding Thomas and Shia, but Thomas suddenly stops and looks off to the side like he noticed something, which makes the women nearby ask him what's wrong as both he and Luke look back. Luke looks pretty confused and asks if something is the matter, so Thomas just plays it cool, saying it's nothing and he just saw something interesting for the first time in a long while, telling everyone not to mind him. Just then a voice calls out for the Lady Saint and Royal Knight Bernard, and a guide starts leading them away, saying the bishop is waiting for them. As they walk through the halls, Luke asks if the bishop is that pirate they saw earlier, and Shia says yeah, he's actually a famous former pirate. As they walk, Luke can't help but ask why a pirate would ever end up becoming a bishop, and Shia explains that the goddess apparently set him up, though she doesn't know the specifics, leaving the group to quietly crack open the door and peek inside the room, where Bishop Levios is waiting. He greets Shia and says it's been a long time since they've seen each other, so Shia gives a nervous smile, telling him she's glad he is doing well. But the bishop gets straight to the point, mentioning he heard the hero fired her from being the party's saint, and he immediately follows up by asking if she lost her powers. Shia gets a bit flustered by the blunt question, but she tells him no, she hasn't lost them yet, which makes Levios look even more curious as he asks why the hero would even let her go, and he demands she gives him a full detailed report on exactly what happened. Shia finishes telling her story over some tea, laying out everything that went down, and Levios just sighs, mentioning he's never really seen a hero who everyone hates this much. He starts breaking down how things work, explaining that the Holy Sword is the one picking heroes, not the goddess, which is a problem, because while the goddess knows the truth, the sword is basically blind to it. Shia looks down, adding that the blade only cares about stuff like stats and specific feelings, so it completely ignores what kind of person the wielder actually is. Levios leans in and asks Shia what her plan is, offering to force the hero to take her back as a saint by throwing a formal petition in his face. He reminds her that saints work for the church, meaning the hero's status doesn't mean a thing, and if that holy sword ever breaks, the guy is done being a hero anyway. The holy sword stands alone, glowing with a strange light. It's a weird blade that actually fixes itself whenever it picks out a new master to carry it. Levios looks her in the eye and explains that since the sword works that way, they can basically just pick a brand new hero whenever they want. He seems ready to move, asking Shia if they should just get this whole process over with as fast as possible so they can deal with the fallout later. Shia looks away, saying there's no point because the current hero is just going to wreck his own life anyway. She tells him her real focus is on the future. She's already set a goal to build her own guild and make it the strongest one around. Levios remembers her dream, mentioning how she always wanted a guild that felt like a warm family, but he's still sitting there at his desk looking skeptical. He reminds her that he told her to wait until she was officially done with her saint duties before running off to do her own thing. Shia just laughs it off, telling him that her time as a saint is basically over at this point. Levios doesn't buy it for a second and tells her straight up that she's still very much a saint, which is true for as long as she still has her powers, assuming she hasn't gone and lost them somehow. The king is apparently so thrilled to have a hero in the country that he's just letting the guy do whatever he wants. But there's a catch because Shia points out that unlike the hero, a saintess can't just be replaced. She catches herself for a second, then starts to explain her logic. Levios just waits for her to go on, curious about what she's actually thinking. Shia admits that she might still technically be the saintess, and if that's the case, she's got another major goal she's working toward. She explains that by making her guild as strong as possible, she plans to gather enough power to take out the demon lord herself, and she wants to get it done as fast as she can. Bernard chimes in, saying that the current hero is probably going to crash and burn pretty soon anyway, so he thinks there's a real chance for a different plan to work. He believes that if they can back a new hero with her power and the strength of the guild, winning the whole war is actually possible. Levios takes a second to process everything, admitting that Shia really does have a talent for picking out the right people, and he thinks that having an eye for talent like that is basically the best skill you could have for training someone up. He's totally on board with the whole idea, mostly because he's always been a huge fan of a good underdog story, so he tells her it's fine by him and he's actually looking forward to seeing how it all plays out. Once that's settled, Levios turns his attention back to Bernard to bring up another important topic, but Bernard cuts in, suggesting that it's probably better if the two kids leave the room before they start talking business. He also mentions that there's still the issue with the little girl they brought along, which Levios agrees with, though he notes they're going to have to fill a certain someone in on the details eventually. He adds that it's going to be a necessary conversation since the whole thing involves that little pipsqueak, and Shia catches the weird nickname immediately, asking if he's actually talking about Lena. The truth finally comes out when someone claims to be the mother of the little girl, and the news hits Shia like a ton of bricks. She screams out Lena's name while Luke just watches her freak out. They eventually find Lena sitting all by herself at a grave in the woods. The little girl looks up at them with these really sad eyes, quietly acknowledging that they've arrived. Shia tries her best to give a small smile, telling the kid that they've finally met again. She reminds Lena about the promise she made to come find her, but the mood is still pretty heavy. Lena starts by saying sorry, then tells them she needs to stay at the gravesite for a little while longer. She tells the two of them to go back and just take their reward from her room. It's like she doesn't even care anymore, telling them they can have absolutely anything they want. The conversation ends with her just asking to be left alone with the grave. Luke and Shia stand there totally frozen as Lena tells them to just go away. She wants them to leave as quickly as possible. Shia can't let it end like this, so she reaches out and whispers the little girl's name, barely able to hold back her emotions before she suddenly pulls the kid into a really tight hug. Holding her close, Shia tells her there is absolutely no way she could ever do what she asked. She says she could never just walk away and leave Lena all by herself in a place like this. Shia just keeps repeating how sorry she is over and over while she holds onto her. And that's when Lena finally breaks down, crying about how she's a bad girl for leaving her mommy all alone. The poor kid sobs that they were actually supposed to make up, but it never happened. She yells through the tears, saying that if she had just stayed by her side, things would be different. She screams that her mom wouldn't have had to die all by herself if she had just been there. A voice explains the dark reality that Lena's mother was actually murdered. Someone broke into the prison and left the place looking like a total nightmare. The person says the attack was so brutal it looked like whoever did it was out for blood, and mentions the only reason the kid survived was because the guild was looking after her. Lena just cries, saying that's exactly what her mom told her would happen. She promised they would be a family again as soon as her dad came back home. The little girl explains that was the whole reason she went to find the bishop for help, leaving everyone stunned by the fact that her mom knew the knights would kill the kid if they caught her. Shia realizes the mom sent Lena away on purpose just to keep her safe from the killers. So she looks at the kid and quietly asks if her mother's spirit is still around right now. Lena looks up with tears in her eyes, explaining how she brings flowers and her mom's favorite sweets every single day. Shia listens and softly tells the kid that if she does that, her mom won't feel alone. She looks Lena in the eyes and promises that as long as she stays right here, her mom will never be lonely, pulling the girl close and telling her everything is going to be okay while the kid just starts crying. Shia holds her tight in the middle of the garden as petals fall around them and Bernard stands back watching. Bernard waits a moment before speaking up, asking the little girl what she's planning to do now, so Shia answers for her, saying she wants to find some info on the kid's father while they're here at the church. She hesitates for a second, then tells Lena she actually has something pretty big she wants to ask, smiling as she asks the girl if she'd like to become their child, which leaves the kid looking totally confused. Bernard points out the church has a massive network across the whole continent, but they'll still have to do the searching themselves. Shia stays close to Lena while Bernard stands by, suggesting that the best way to move forward is for them to join a guild together. And Shia looks up with a smile, asking if there's any way they can actually help the kid out with her situation. Lena looks down, feeling a bit down as she says she doesn't think she can really do anything useful, muttering that the only thing she actually knows how to do is cook. Bernard jumps in right away, telling Rena he'd honestly love to try whatever she makes. So Shia asks what her specialty is, and the girl says it's mostly just different kinds of egg dishes. Lena perks up suddenly, telling them she really wants to make some omuris, which gets Shia totally hyped as she asks the kid to feed her some too. The girl grips her dress tight, saying that even if she isn't much help, she wants to do this, but then she suddenly realizes something and says she has to go right this second. Bernard is already off in a daydream, imagining himself telling the bishop that he'll cherish Lena forever and asking to take her in, while he pictures the girl happily asking him to take good care of her, looking totally pleased with himself as the group keeps moving. Shia jumps in with her own idea, saying that for her, she just wants Lena as a little sister. The two of them walk down the street as Shia mentions how lucky they are that they got permission for this so easily. Bernard admits he begged the bishop pretty hard, but the guy just told him he was being way too intense about the whole thing. As they walk, Shia thinks back on the room Lena was staying in, noting that the girl is actually being treated surprisingly well, though she knows it's usually standard for kids who lose their parents in situations like that to just get sent to an orphanage. She realizes her worries about the bishop having some hidden motive were totally wrong, and feels a lot better about it as night falls over the city buildings. And the group finally settles in for the evening. Shia starts humming to herself while she cooks a meal, with Bernard just hanging out at the table waiting to eat. Lena looks like she's about to lose it. She's staring at the steak dinner with huge, sparkling eyes because she's never seen food this good before. Shia and Bernard just sit back and watch her get all hyped up while they eat outside. The sky is starting to get dark over the city streets. Everything is pretty quiet until a loud knock at the door catches everyone's attention. Shia tells them to come in, and Ivar's tailor just walks right in with a big smile on his face. He waves at Shia and says it's been a while since they last saw each other, calling her Lady Julius like he always used to. Shia is totally caught off guard by the visit. She asks him why he's showing up at her place so out of the blue, but Ivar's just laughs it off. He tells her that his business today actually isn't with her at all. He's there for the boy. He looks right at Luke and asks if that's him. Luke points at himself, completely shocked that a guy like this knows who he is. So Ivar's just apologizes for dropping by without giving them a heads up first. Ivar's leads the way, saying he figured it was best to get Luke's training started right away. Shia holds Lena's hand as they follow him walking through a wooded path together. Ivar's mentions that the person they're going to see lives just a bit further up the trail. Shia starts getting a bit nervous thinking about Luke's new sword master. After hearing how legendary this guy is, she's imagining some huge, muscle-bound dude with sunglasses. She can't help but wonder what kind of person they're actually about to meet. They finally make it to a small house, and when Ivar's knocks, a voice from inside asks who's there. Ivar's calls out through the door, introducing himself as Royal Knight Julius McBell, and then he adds that he's brought over their new disciple. Luke and Shia just stand there looking totally stressed out while Ivar says excuse me and lets himself in. The group steps inside and finds a cozy home filled with sunlight and hanging plants everywhere. Right on the wall, there's a crest with a shield and 2 swords. A voice from the room greets them, sounding interested in the visitors. Inside the house, a voice says he was just wondering who this new apprentice was supposed to be. The group sees an old man sitting comfortably in a rocking chair by the fireplace. He looks up and asks if they aren't the same kids he saw yesterday, and Luke and Lena both freeze up. They weren't expecting this guy here. The old man just smiles warmly at them while stroking his long white beard. He says he's actually glad to see them again, even calling the kids golden eggs with a look of pure satisfaction on his face. Ivar's looks back and forth between everyone, totally confused. He asks if they all already know each other, so the old man explains that they met briefly at that shitty bishop's place the day before. He doesn't seem to have a high opinion of the church, but he immediately softens up when he looks at Lena. He calls her a cute kid and offers her a sweet bun. Shia can't believe it. She realizes this old man from the street is actually the legendary sword master Ivar's was talking about. The man just hums to himself, looking ready to get down to business. Ivar's watches from the side as Jenhazark starts circling Luke, checking him out from every angle. Luke just stands there, feeling a bit awkward while the old man complains about his height. Jenhazark says looking up at him makes his neck feel like it's about to snap. So Luke freaks out and immediately starts apologizing for being so thoughtless. He ducks down to match the old man's height, which makes things way better. Jenhazark closes his eyes and smiles, telling the kid that this is much more comfortable and to just relax. Ivar's finally loses his patience and tells Master Jenhazark to stop messing around and get to the point already. Jen Hazark just laughs it off and says his bad. He starts patting Luke down, noting that while the kid is mostly skin and bones, he has a good look to him and should fill out soon. The old man stops the jokes and introduces himself properly as Jen Hazark Lirios. He looks Luke right in the eye and reveals his real background. He explains that even if he looks like a nobody now, he was actually the vice captain of the Royal Knights, a total legend. He says he knows he just looks like some old guy leaning on a cane these days. But that's not the whole story, because he's going to use every single thing he's ever learned to train Luke into a real fighter. Luke bows and tells the old man they're in his hands, officially agreeing to the training, and Shia jumps in right away, asking if they should get started with the lessons immediately. Ivars looks a bit worried and asks Shia if she's really sure about leaving Luke with this guy, but Shia just smiles and says they should probably just ask Luke how he feels about it, though Jen Hazark is busy observing them, mentioning it's pretty obvious the little lady is the one calling the shots. He starts teasing Luke, telling him he's lucky to be bossed around by such a cute girl, which makes Luke completely freak out. Luke tries to explain that it's not like that and that they're actually just family, but that just makes it worse. Jen Hazark looks totally shocked and asks how they already have a kid together at their age. The whole group just stands there in awkward silence while the misunderstanding hangs in the air. As they walk off, Shia just laughs it off and says that the old man is definitely energetic. Ivars walks with the girls and admits that the old man is actually pretty scary. Shia just laughs it off, saying she finally understands why Ivars was acting so nervous before. He explains that back then, both he and the vice captain used to get wrecked by that guy, which makes Shia start to worry if Luke is actually going to survive the training. She decides they should just go shopping to distract themselves until everything is finished. Ivars is down for the plan and asks Shia what kind of stuff she's looking for, even suggesting things like new clothes or cosmetics while Shia thinks about it. Shia thinks they should check out a toy store for Lena, but the kid has other ideas. Instead of toys, Lena starts listing off bandages, medicine, and extra clothes, and even wants a book on nutrition so she can start getting stronger, leaving the adults shocked. Ivars is stressed out because Shia has gone totally dark, muttering some really depressing things under her breath. She looks completely drained and just keeps complaining about how Ivars is no fun at all, making things a bit awkward, until Lena speaks up with a sweet smile, asking if they can please help carry the bags. Ivars plays along and tells her, "As you wish, my lady," as he and Shia load themselves up with all the gear. They walk through the busy market with their arms full, leaving Lena looking absolutely thrilled as she hugs a cute black cat plushie she picked out for herself. Shia doesn't forget the essentials though, making sure to grab a full medical kit and plenty of supplies for later. And they even hit up a bookstore where Ivars helps them grab some books off the high shelves. The group finishes their shopping spree by grabbing some snacks and drinks, finally looking like they're actually having a good time together. After a while, someone realizes it's getting late and mentions that it's probably time to head back to check on the training. But the second they get back, Shia completely loses it. She stands there shaking and sweating as she looks at the scene in front of her. Luke is collapsed on the ground, looking absolutely wrecked and covered in dirt. Shia screams his name, seeing that the kid has been pushed way past his limit. Shia stands there completely frozen while a massive bucket appears in the frame, and before she can even react, Jen dumps the whole thing on Luke to wake him up. Jen just gives a casual little apology, admitting he might have gone a bit too far with the kid, so Shia immediately tries to step in, saying she's going to cast a healing spell to help him. But Jen shuts her down instantly, telling her that using any healing magic is strictly forbidden right now. He explains that while magic is convenient for fixing things fast, it's not the way to go here, mostly because it would just undo all the physical growth Luke's body earned through that brutal training. The medical supplies Shia bought earlier are laid out, showing jars and bandages ready for use. Shia starts bandaging Luke's arm manually, glad she bought the kit, even though the kid is still groaning in pain. Jen looks at the exhausted kid and finally gives him some props, telling Luke he's actually got some real potential. Jen gives a little wink and tells Luke to come back to see him as soon as his wounds are all healed up, and he promises the kid that next time, he'll definitely be even stronger than he was today. Luke just looks up at him, totally stunned by the encouragement after such a rough day. The kid manages to find his voice and thanks Jen for everything, so Jen starts heading off, telling Shia that he's leaving Luke in her care for a while. He makes sure to tell her that the kid needs a well-balanced diet and plenty of rest, and Shia holds up her nutrition book, saying she's already got that part completely covered. Jen laughs and says she's impressive as always, but Shia just tells him she's not his daughter. The group starts walking away while Jen waves from his door. Luke can barely even stand. They eventually make it back and meet up with Ivars, who's standing there waiting for them. The group arrives back home and Lena notices the place is sparkling clean. Shia is just confused because she realizes the light is actually on at their front door. It's weird since nobody should be there, so she starts wondering if they might have some kind of guest waiting for them. They get closer when two tiny cats, one black and one white, suddenly show up and start meowing at them. Shia, Luke, and Lena all stop dead in their tracks, completely floored by what's sitting on their porch. It's Sir Bernard. He's literally sitting in a wooden box with a "Please adopt me" sign, looking totally pathetic. The little black cat just keeps on meowing while the white one casually cleans its paws. Lena's eyes light up, and she says the two cats look just like the ones from her favorite picture book. She looks over at the knight in the box and asks if these are his kitties, but Sir Bernard just looks incredibly awkward and tells her that's definitely not what's going on here. Sir Bernard explains he had some guild business to take care of, but he started playing with these cats on the way and just got attached. He's sweating a little as he admits he asked the cats if they wanted to wait with him and ended up bringing the whole box along. Shia feels bad and apologizes for keeping him waiting for such a long time, but the whole situation is just weird. Even while he's sitting in a cardboard box like a stray, he reminds her that he's actually a member of the famous Lions of Dawn. Shia looks at him and the kittens, finally asking if there's something specific he actually needs help with. So she tries to stay calm and suggests they start from the beginning, but Sir Bernard looks like he's about to lose it. He starts apologizing over and over, looking more desperate by the second, and it turns out there's a big problem because the guy starts full-on crying, yelling out that he's actually stuck and can't get his body out of the box. He keeps sobbing and begs them to help him because he really needs to use the bathroom right this second. Shia and Luke just stand there, totally floored by how pathetic he is. Sir Bernard finally finishes up and looks totally relieved, sighing about how much better he feels after that emergency. So Shia sits him down to finally get some answers, asking him what he actually needed from them in the first place. The guy gets surprisingly intense, announcing that his name is Leold Burns and that he's a warrior who takes a lot of pride in his strength. But then he switches back to being desperate, begging Shia to please take an old man like him in. Shia just gives him a blank look, reminding him that her guild isn't exactly a shelter for old guys who have nowhere else to go. Leold quickly clarifies that's not what he meant. He actually wants to apply to join her guild as a member. He starts explaining his situation over some tea, mentioning that he was actually part of a different guild until just recently. And as Luke listens in, Leold awkwardly admits that he ended up getting kicked out of his old group for some specific reasons. Shia is pretty shocked to hear he got fired, but before she can even ask why, some people start pounding on the guild door, yelling for Leold and making it clear they know he's hiding inside. Someone outside starts screaming for the deadbeat to come out, which definitely catches Shia off guard. Luke just stands there totally speechless while Leold literally dives under the table to hide from the noise. Shia doesn't even blink and starts heading for the door, even though Luke looks like he's about to lose it. He tries to warn her to watch out, but Shia is already at the entrance ready to handle things, and as she pulls the door open, she calmly asks the people outside if they actually have business with her guild. The bald guy out front asks what this kid wants, but his buddy spots Leold hiding inside and starts yelling. Shia stands her ground and blocks the doorway, stopping them from barging in. She gives them a cold look and makes it clear that she's the one in charge of the guild. She tells them she's only asking one more time and demands to know what they actually want with them. The bald guy just laughs it off, saying it's pretty rare to see a little girl acting like a guild master. The bald guy standing at the door gives a smug look, telling Shia he's only saying this for her own good and she needs to hand the guy over right now. Shia stares at him wondering who this guy even is, while Leold stays in the background looking completely stressed out. The thug explains that Leold actually tripped while he was guarding a noble's mansion and ended up smashing a really expensive vase. So he laughs and yells out that the guy is now 10 million G in debt, which leaves Shia standing there totally speechless. Leold finally snaps and tells them to stop being ridiculous. He argues that the vase he broke was really only worth about 1 million G in the first place, but the loan sharks just tacked on a bunch of interest and crazy penalties to hike the total all the way up to 10 million. Shia realizes he definitely broke it, though she still thinks 1 million G sounds like an insane amount of money for a vase. She looks over and asks Leold if he actually went and borrowed money from these people, and Leold looks down, admitting they basically trapped him at the mansion and wouldn't let him leave unless he paid the million on the spot. Shia watches the interaction and realizes these guys are definitely working together to trap Leold. The bald guy just laughs and tells Leold that if he tries to run away again, his wife and kid are the ones who are going to get hurt. Leold looks completely horrified at the thought of his family being in danger, and he snaps, yelling at the thugs to stay away and not lay a single hand on his wife or his child. He gets desperate, telling them they're already divorced and basically strangers, so they need to be left out of this mess. Leold hangs his head and tells Shia he's sorry, but he can't let her get dragged into his trouble anymore. He looks away, admitting that there's just no way for him to pay back that much money. He gives up completely, telling the loan shark to just hand him over to the knights or sell him into slavery. But Shia jumps in, telling Leold she's actually going to work him to the bone, and then she turns her attention back toward the thugs to settle things once and for all. Out of nowhere, the two cats lunge forward and start clawing at the thugs' faces. Everything turns into total chaos as the guys scream, and Shia just stands there, completely stunned. The thugs yell out in confusion while the cats jump back, and Lena rushes over, apologizing and saying the kitties just suddenly ran off. Shia looks at the nervous girl and tells her it's okay because she actually helped out. Then she turns back to the thugs who are shaking and covered in scratches. With a serious look, Shia tells them that Leold is here for a guild interview. She makes it clear that she isn't letting them take him away without her permission. Luke steps in too, asking the guys to leave if they don't want to get hurt, and he finishes by telling them to never show their faces around here ever again. The scruffy thug looks like he's about to lose it, yelling at Luke and asking if the kid has actually lost his mind. He doubles down on the threat, saying Luke is the one who's going to get hurt while pulling out a pair of scissors like it's a real weapon. Shia doesn't even flinch, she just closes her eyes and starts a quiet prayer, hoping that even a tiny bit of the goddess's grace can reach these guys, but the thugs just freak out thinking Luke is some kind of mage. She takes a firm step forward, deciding it's time to just get this whole situation over with, and just like that, huge pillars of light shoot up from the ground right where the thugs are standing. Luke and Lena can't believe what they're seeing. The guys have completely vanished, and everyone's left wondering where they went. Shia looks back at them and tells them to relax, explaining she just sent them away and they're still alive, while a strange message left behind says something about living life so fully it makes a person regret being alive. Moving on, the thugs find themselves dropped in the middle of a dark, empty hallway, totally confused about how they got there. The thugs look around in shock as a voice complains about Shia leaving them with such a disaster. The two guys are shaking, and the voice reminds them that a promise is a promise, and it's time to pay up. Bishop Gardner shows up with a smirk, casually greeting them and telling them it's officially time to repent, but switching gears for a second to look back at how Rioldo ended up in such a mess. Turns out Rioldo accidentally broke a vase worth $1 million at a noble's mansion, and the guy wouldn't let it go, forcing Rioldo to borrow the money from some shady people just so he could finally leave the house. Those guys tacked on a bunch of insane fees, and suddenly his debt ballooned to $10 million, leaving the group sitting around a table realizing that a brand new F-rank guild like theirs can't make that kind of money, since paying off a debt that huge is really only possible for a legendary S-rank guild. But then Shia gets a serious look on her face and tells Rioldo she actually has a proposal for it. Shia lays out the plan, saying they'll borrow $1 million from the guild bank to start, and she figures they can use that cash to finally get those debt collectors off their backs. Leold isn't so sure about it though. He points out that they're basically just taking out another loan, and he starts getting worried, saying if they can't pay this one back, her reputation is going to be ruined. Shia doesn't seem stressed and tells him the repayment period is 5 years. So it'll be fine, but deep down she knows they have to get stronger fast if they're going to defeat the Demon Lord. She realizes that if they can just hit a high rank within 3 years, paying back the $1 million is actually doable, especially since she's sure Luke is going to become the strongest swordsman around. Then there's Lena, who can literally see people's auras, giving them a huge edge, so Shia figures as long as her own holy maiden powers stay strong, she'll be the perfect support for the team. Shia stays focused and tells the group that their big plan definitely isn't an impossible goal, but Leold still looks pretty stressed out about it, asking if there's even anything in this deal for her. Suddenly, Lena's cat jumps away and she screams for it to wait, making Leold jump while she grabs onto him. Leold looks down and asks if she's okay, but the poor kid is just blushing and apologizing through her tears. Shia watches them and notices how red the girl's face is getting, so she decides to change the subject and asks Leold what the deal is with his family, which makes him go quiet. He starts opening up, saying the debt collectors after him were just relentless and wouldn't give him a break. Even though his wife and kids promised they'd handle the struggle together, Leold looks down and admits that he just couldn't bear to see them suffer like that anymore, so he reveals that he got a divorce so he could take on the debt and pay it all off on his own. Leold pictures his wife and daughter waving goodbye. He admits he just can't give up on his dream of going back to pick them up from his parents' place out in the countryside someday. Luke looks away all embarrassed, and Shia just gives him this soft, understanding look. Then she looks over at Leold and asks if he'll swear to protect his new guild family, which totally catches him off guard. She tells him it's a mandatory condition if he wants to join, staring him right in the eyes as she asks him one more time if he's really down for that. Leold stammers that he definitely swears to it, so Shia asks the kids if they're cool with him joining up. Both Luke and Lena yell out that they have no problems with it at all, and as Shia asks if he heard their answer, Leold just starts losing it and starts crying like crazy. He sits there at the table just sobbing, telling everyone thank you over and over again. Shia claps her hands together to get everyone's attention and says it's time to stop crying. They've got a mountain of debt to pay off, so it's time to get to work. She starts checking out the situation, looking closely at something with a really focused expression, while she thinks to herself that for a guy who's supposed to be a warrior, Leold's actual talent with weapons is pretty low. But then she notices something weird on his status screen. Most of his combat skills are trash, but his personality is a perfect S rank, and his magic potential is climbing from the bottom all the way up to S rank 2. She completely loses it seeing that kind of magic talent, so she turns to Leold and asks him what he likes to do in his free time, explaining that usually, the stuff people do for fun is where you find glimpses of their real hidden potential. Leold rubs his face and thinks about it for a second before telling her he mostly just reads books while he's working out, and he mentions that he'll read pretty much anything, from random fantasy novels to heavy books on economics. Hearing that, Shia gets an idea and asks him if he's ever been interested in reading magic grimoires. Leold looks a bit lost and says he doesn't really follow what she's getting at, so Shia starts to explain that he's dealing with a real-deal saint, and the realization finally hits Leold like a ton of bricks as he processes the fact that he actually has talent for magic. He looks at his hands, still stunned, and admits that he definitely felt like he was hitting a dead end trying to fight as a warrior, just staring at his palm and trying to imagine himself actually being a mage. Shia mentions that since she's already great at holy and support magic, it'd be perfect if he focused on attack magic, and she checks his stats again, seeing that his potential for every type of elemental attack magic is through the roof. She tells him it's incredible because he could learn all 4 main elements plus spatial magic, asking what he thinks, but he can barely believe it. Moving on, Shia says the first step is for him to start studying the ancient language so he can actually read grimoires, but Leold just blinks and tells her that he actually already knows how to read it. Shia is completely blindsided by what she just heard, while Leold casually asks how she could even think of studying in a fight. She just yells back, wondering how he even knows the language, and that's when Leold drops a bombshell, telling her that he actually graduated from the Royal Academy. He looks pretty embarrassed about his past as he explains the situation to a stunned Shia and Lena. Shia can't even believe her ears, repeating the word royal like it's the craziest thing she's ever heard. She points out how famous that school is and demands to know why a top-tier graduate is a warrior. So Leold explains that while he did study the old languages there, things went south fast. The first time he tried to use a magic staff, the whole thing just blew up in his face. After that total disaster, he realized he wasn't cut out for it and decided to just give up on the whole idea of being a mage. He figures it happened because his compatibility with magic staffs was a total failure, which leaves Shia looking pretty awkward as she listens to his story. Moving on, he adds that he wasn't really made for boring desk jobs like being a researcher or a royal officer anyway, so he had to find another path. He tells her he really just wanted to help people, so he actually spent some time working as a school teacher for a while. But Shia is still confused and asks how he managed to go from being a teacher to becoming a rough warrior. Leold admits he accidentally tripped one day and knocked the principal's wig off, and just like that, his teaching career was over. Luke looks pretty stressed out by the story, while Shia just thinks to herself that Leold is a total klutz. She looks at their group, seeing Luke as the swordsman and Leold as the attack mage. Then there's Lena, who just looks like a total angel while she's hanging out with the cats. Shia rounds out the group as the saintess for healing and support, and she's feeling pretty good about how everything is coming together. She thinks the party has a great balance, and she's totally convinced that this is going to turn into a really great guild. Time flies by after that, and the scene shifts to the city 1 month later. The guild office is looking busy with paperwork everywhere. Lena is sitting at the desk when someone suddenly shouts her name, making her look up from her work in a hurry. It turns out someone is calling for Leold too, catching him right in the middle of his studies. Luke is just finishing up some practice when Shia suddenly yells his name, telling him they're all heading out, and she makes it clear that he needs to put on his absolute best clothes for the occasion. Once the whole group is dressed up and ready, Luke asks where they're even supposed to be going. Shia doesn't miss a beat and tells him they're headed straight to a noble's mansion. Luke completely loses it at the news, panicking because he thinks all nobles are terrifying. Shia explains that this specific noble is going to help them out by being a guarantor for their debt. Leold starts crying and calling himself useless since he can't pay it off himself. But Shia just ignores the drama, staying positive and telling the guys that this could be the guild's first real big break. She tells everyone to get a move on so they can finally get things started. A bit later, the carriage pulls up to some massive houses, and a nervous Luke asks if they're actually in the noble district. Luke starts sweating as the realization hits, asking Shia if their cosigner is really going to be a noble, and Shia just nods. saying that only nobles or really rich merchants have 1 million gold to toss around. Leold starts spiraling in the back of the carriage, crying about how scary nobles are while Shia watches him, until the carriage finally pulls up to the gate, and she tells everyone that they've finally made it. The mansion is absolutely massive, a total palace that leaves Luke and the others completely stunned. So Shia tries to calm them down, telling the guys there's really no reason to be that intimidated by a house. She gives Luke a little hint, mentioning that the person they're visiting is actually someone he knows, which just confuses the kid even more since he can't remember ever meeting a noble in his life. Just then, a voice from the side calls out, asking if she's the one named Shia, causing her to turn around and find a very polished-looking man who introduces himself as Lawrence, the head butler. Lawrence smiles warmly at her, saying he's truly delighted to finally meet her, and Shia gives a polite little bow, introducing herself as Shia Rufino. The butler leads them toward the inner rooms, mentioning he looks forward to their time together today as they walk into a massive hall with giant chandeliers that leaves Luke and the others totally breathless. Lawrence shows them to a sitting area and asks them to wait for a bit, so Shia thanks him, but she notices Luke and Leold are still frozen in place, telling them to stop acting like statues. She tries to get them to relax with some tea and sweets, when suddenly the door slams open and a handsome guy with long hair walks in, saying it's been a while and he's really missed her. Shia stands up to greet him properly, noting it has been a long time since they saw each other, but the noble just gives her a look, telling her she really doesn't need to be that formal with him. Clement leans in with a big smile, telling Shia she should just call him brother like she did back in the day, but Shia looks completely stressed out, pleading with Viscount Cede von Clement to stop being so unreasonable. Nearby, Leold gets a look of realization, mentioning that the name Clement actually sounds pretty familiar from something he read, which makes Luke turn to him immediately, asking the old man if he really knows who this guy is. Leold explains that the second son of the Clement family is famous for being one of the top 3 most handsome men in the whole kingdom, while the Viscount keeps pestering Shia to call him brother, until another man in a white and red uniform shows up, speaking up to say he's the one who actually called Shia here. He walks into the room with a very serious vibe, telling everyone present that he's going to deal with the Viscount himself. The new guy tells Clement to quit it and get back to his office already, leaving the Viscount pouting like a kid while Shia just stands there exhausted. Clement lets out a sigh, telling the man he calls Bell that there's no need to be so cold and harsh toward him. Meanwhile, Luke and Leold are just standing there with their jaws on the floor, while little Lena looks on without a clue what's happening. Viscount Clement holds out a plate of food with a big smile, asking Shia if she likes sweets before offering her a piece of strawberry cake. But Shia just looks totally drained as Leold steps in with his own fork, telling her not to let his brother's smooth-talking trick her. He doubles down on the pressure, shoving a piece of apple pie toward her as the two brothers start competing, leaving Shia stuck in the middle, internally screaming for help while Clement stays cheery and Leold gives off a dark, intense vibe. She wonders why none of the guys are stepping in to save her, though it's obvious little Lena is just having fun watching the drama, which is weird because these two usually get along, but right now the tension between them is actually getting pretty crazy. Shia starts to realize that seeing the Viscount dote on her like a pet is making Leold act way more competitive than usual, so she wonders if he's actually just grumpy because he feels like his favorite older brother is being taken away from him. Despite the chaos, Viscount Cid Land Clement keeps his focus on her, repeating that he really wants her to just call him brother, while a woman nearby just lets out a heavy sigh, looking like she completely understands how exhausting these two can be. Shia looks pretty wiped out from the brotherly drama and says it looks like her little break is over. Leold shifts the focus back to the real reason they're there, mentioning she has some serious business to discuss with Bell today. He decides to play the role of the good big brother and tells them he'll head out so they can take their time, leaving Shia just standing there completely lost, wondering what that whole weird interaction was even about. Lawrence the butler just sighs and says good grief, explaining he actually gave the Viscount a mountain of work so he'd stay in his office and never even told him Shia was visiting. Leold is still annoyed and wants to know how his brother even caught wind of her being there, while Shia tries to get him to relax, telling him she was actually glad to see Cid again since he's always been so kind to her ever since they were kids. Leold starts thinking they should have met at the Knight's headquarters instead, though he knows the mansion is the safest place to talk about the balls, but before he can finish that thought, someone suddenly calls out to him by his old title. Shia notices something's off and just lets out a quick ahem while looking around, noticing that Luke is just standing there looking completely miserable. He hasn't said a word and he looks pretty grumpy. Shia turns to him and mentions that he's clearly been in a bad mood for a while now, but Bell speaks up to get things back on track, saying his brother Cid totally derailed their talk earlier, and he asks the group if they should finally get around to the main reason they're all there. He sets a paper down on the table and explains it's a loan application for the guild bank, pointing out that once both he and Shia sign the document, they can just submit it and get the money they need. Shia looks a little unsure about the deal and asks if Lord Bernard, or Leold, is really going to sign it for free, but Belle confirms she's right to wonder, because he actually has a specific job he wants to request of her guild. He starts explaining the situation by reminding her they're in the capital of the Rades kingdom, where things are about to get complicated. Belle points to a spot on the map and tells everyone he wants them to head over to Pola village, a place just northwest of where they are now. Shia looks over the map and figures out that the village itself probably isn't the real destination, and Belle tells her she's spot on explaining that the place they actually need to go is the forest right next to Pola village. He pauses for a second to mention that the woods have a specific name they're known by, calling the area the Forest of the Holy Beast, a place where the sunlight barely cuts through the thick trees. Belle looks at the group and says he wants all of them to go and investigate what's happening in that area. The mention of a holy beast catches them off guard, making them repeat the name back to him. Belle goes on to explain that it's a legendary creature from old stories that's supposed to show up and protect people, but only when a pure maiden prays for it. He adds that this maiden is considered a messenger of the goddess, and she's the one who supposedly gives the saint her power. Luke immediately looks over at Shia, putting two and two together about the saint stuff, while Shia just groans like she's already tired of the conversation. Shia looks pretty stressed as she tells Belle that she hates to let him down, but her attempt was a total bust, and she explains that she actually tried to take on the challenge once before in the past. Thinking back on it, she realizes that failure might be the exact reason the hero started doubting she was the real saint. While behind her, the hero admits he was actually pretty shocked by how things went down back then. He acts like it's no big deal now though, saying sacred beasts are just fairy tales and nothing to lose sleep over. Changing the subject, he says what he really needs to ask her about is something called the Black Dew, explaining that a strange black mist has started showing up all over the sacred beast's forest lately. Word is that any animal touching it turns super aggressive, and all the plants just shrivel up and die. Shia gets a serious look in her eyes and says she knows one specific thing that could cause a mess like that, and the hero finishes her thought, confirming that they're definitely dealing with miasma. Shia gets a serious look and says she's pretty sure this black mist is actually miasma, which makes Leold realize that if that's the case, a saint's purification power would be the perfect fix. Shia tells him she's glad he's catching on so fast, but the conversation turns back to Sid, who explains that the whole point is to check if the rumors are true and purify the area if it really is miasma, basically doing whatever it takes to get the forest back to normal. He makes it clear that these are his strict conditions if he's going to co-sign for her debt. And without any hesitation, Shia takes his hand and tells him she accepts the request. Sid looks satisfied and says they officially have a deal. Then later, he waves the group off, telling them to stay safe even though he doesn't think they'll run into anything too crazy. Shia bows deeply and gives him a formal thank you as Lord Bernard, which leaves the guy feeling a little awkward. Shia notices something is off and asks Luke what's wrong, seeing as Luke is just standing there before he suddenly asks Leold if he'll fight him. Shia completely loses it and yells at Luke, asking what's wrong with him, but Luke ignores the outburst and explains he's been training a lot lately. He tells Leold that he really just wants to test his skills, and with a super serious look on his face, he pleads with him to please agree. Leold stays quiet for a second before looking down and telling Luke he's sorry. Luke looks caught off guard as Leold mentions he's actually busy right now, saying he'd love to keep him company, but he has real work to finish first. Luke just looks at the floor and says he understands, clearly disappointed by the rejection. Shia says goodbye to Lord Bernard and tells him they're heading out, then calls for Luke, who just stands there looking completely exhausted after getting rejected by the knight. As they walk away, Sid suddenly stops and calls out to Luke, using the name Lux, turning back with a smirk to tell the kid not to get the wrong idea about things. Luke looks pretty confused by the cryptic advice, but Shia snaps him out of it, yelling that she's going to leave him behind if he doesn't hurry up and move. The story jumps ahead 6 days, showing a carriage traveling through the hills until someone steps out onto the dirt road, relieved that the long trip is finally over. Shia and the kids cheer about making it to their destination, but moving on, Leold is struggling to even stand, complaining that the bumpy ride totally killed his back. Shia watches Lena enjoy the trip and says she's just happy the kid is finally having some fun, even though she knows it might be dangerous. She really wanted to show her what the world is like. They finally arrive at their destination, and Shia tells the group that they've made it to Pola village, suggesting they should find a place to stay and drop off their heavy bags before doing anything else. She decides they'll head to the inn first, and then everyone will split up to start gathering information. The girls are excited, but Luke and Leold look a bit depressed about being paired up for the job, leaving the two guys to head off on their own while Shia and Lena start asking around. One of the locals tells them about a weird black mist that has everyone spooked, and a woman nearby adds that whenever it shows up, even the calmest animals in the woods go totally wild. Another villager looks pretty shaken while explaining how the mist appeared while he was just out gathering herbs. The old villager explains how the plants and flowers just started dying right in front of him, so he got out of there as fast as he could. Shia checks her notes and realizes everything they're hearing matches up perfectly with what Bernard warned them about earlier. She's deep in thought until she notices Lena acting weird and asks the kid what's wrong. Lena points down a narrow side street toward a couple, saying she sees a lady over there who's crying. They decide to head over and check on her, with Shia asking if everything is all right or if something happened, but the woman is too upset to answer, just burying her face in her hands while a man stands by her. Lena steps closer to get her attention, and the woman finally looks up with eyes full of tears. The little girl tries to help in her own way, asking the lady if her stomach is hurting or something, looking her right in the eyes and asking one more time if she's really doing okay. The woman doesn't say a word, she just stares back looking totally heartbroken as the tears keep falling. Shia watches from behind as Lena tries to help the woman who's completely breaking down on the ground. The poor lady is a total mess, sobbing about some runes and crying out for her child like her heart is breaking. Shia starts putting the pieces together and asks if it's actually a child that went missing, so the man standing with the woman confirms it, saying the kid has been gone since yesterday. He explains that the whole village went out looking for them, but they couldn't find a single clue, and things are starting to feel pretty hopeless, though Shia tries to be kind and says she hopes they find them soon. The guy feels bad for venting to a total stranger and apologizes for bringing it up, while Lena just stands there looking completely drained. Back at the building, someone is yelling at the top of their lungs about how the questioning went nowhere, demanding to know if they really came back with absolutely nothing to show for their work. It turns out Luke is feeling pretty useless. He realizes that pairing a quiet guy like him with a huge, scary-looking dude like Leold was probably the worst way to get people to talk. Shia looks down at the floor and admits that she made a mistake, while Leold just stands there looking confused. She turns to the guys and explains that the info they picked up earlier matches exactly what she just told them. Luke crosses his arms and says it looks like they're going to have to go check out the Holy Beast Forest in person, but Lena looks like she's already gearing up to help out. So Shia watches her for a second before leaning in to tell the girl that she can't actually come with them because the forest is way too dangerous. Shia suggests a trade and asks if Lena can stay back to dig up more information from the people in the village instead. She tells Lena that this is a really important mission and asks if she can count on her to handle it, making the little girl get all fired up. She clenches her fists and promises she's going to do her absolute best. Shia then asks Luke if he can stay behind to help out with the intel gathering, and he quickly agrees that he'll do it. With the plan all set, the group finally sits down to eat, looking a lot more cheerful as they enjoy their meal together. After their long day, Shia and Lena finally get some sleep in their separate beds, resting up while the moon hangs high over the quiet village trees. But the peace doesn't last long because soon enough, Shia and Leold are out on the trail, making their way through a dense forest. Shia stops and looks around, saying they've finally made it to the forest of the Holy Beast. She takes in the surroundings and notes that the whole vibe hasn't changed a bit since she was last here. Looking ahead, she tells Leold that the spring where the beast lives is just a little further up. So Leold agrees and says they should keep heading that way for now, leading to the two of them walking deeper into the woods together, staying quiet as they push through the brush until they reach the edge of a still pond with a stone altar sitting right in the center of the water. Shia stands before the shrine and starts calling out, asking for the holy beast to show itself. Shia stands before the altar and calls out, asking the beast to hear the prayer of the saint, but nothing happens, leaving her and Leold standing there in a really awkward silence. Leold sighs and tells her it looks like it's no use after all, so Shia starts thinking back, mentioning she remembers reading something about this in an old book. Leold mentions he heard a story that only a pure maiden can cross the water to the beast, and Shia looks totally caught off guard, telling him that part is definitely news to her. Leold points toward the water and suggests she should just head to the shrine and try waking it up. He tells her to just give it a shot, since the worst case is she just falls in and gets wet, but Shia isn't feeling it at all, saying she really doesn't want to fall and get soaked, especially because it would totally piss her off if falling proved she wasn't as pure as everyone thinks. Leold gives her a big smile and tells her everything is going to be totally fine. He says even if she does end up taking a dip, he can just use fire magic to dry her off. Shia decides to go for it but ends up slipping right away, letting out a quick yell as she hits the water with a massive splash, leaving Leold just watching from the shore. She stays face down in the lake while Leold stands there in a really long, awkward silence. Leold can't help himself and jokes that maybe she just wasn't pure enough, but Shia immediately tells him to shut up. She's clearly losing it, shouting about how frustrated she is, and complaining that it's way too hot. Leold starts panicking and says he's sorry, realizing he probably used way too much heat to dry her clothes. They take a second to settle down in the woods until Shia suddenly says his name, and Leold looks over at her, both of them getting quiet as the mood shifts. Jen notices something moving in the brush and points out that their guests have finally arrived. A strange wolf-like monster with glowing white eyes and dark liquid dripping from its first steps out. The beast stands its ground as a heavy sound fills the air. Shia and Leold immediately tense up. Shia looks over at Leold and asks him if he has ever seen a creature like that before, but she realizes even after memorizing 10 whole volumes of monster guides, she has no idea what it is. Leold stares down the wolf and warns her that they probably shouldn't touch the thing directly. He asks Shia if she can take it on while he covers her. But then Luke cuts in and yells for his master to just trust the old man. Leold looks surprised as Luke tells them that Jen said he can handle this, so he's putting all his faith in the old guy's muscles. Shia is totally confused, wondering if she should be helping Jen with magic or just boosting his strength. Shia is feeling the pressure and decides she'll just use both magic and strength buffs at the same time. Leold looks fired up and shouts that this is exactly what he expected from his master, while he sports a huge grin, telling everyone he can feel an incredible power surging through him. He doesn't waste a second and charges straight at the beast, leaving Shia in the back looking totally shocked. She reaches out and tries to get him to wait, but he's already moving way too fast for her to stop. She screams at him that getting that close to the creature is way too dangerous. Suddenly, a massive battle cry rings out through the woods as someone makes their move. Jen steps up and blasts the monster with fire magic, causing a huge explosion that covers everything. Shia stands there with a totally blank face, just staring at the chaos. The fight is over instantly, leaving Leold standing over the smoking remains while Shia watches. Shia is totally floored by what she just saw. Thinking it's so cool, she asks Leold if he's actually able to use magic without even saying an incantation. Leold just gives her a big smile and explains that he basically uses his own muscles as a medium to cast his spells, and he mentions that for simple stuff like fire magic, he doesn't need to chant anything at all. Shia can't believe he's being so casual about it, telling him that combining his intellect and muscles like that is honestly pretty incredible. But Leold brushes off the compliment and tells her they need to focus. Pointing out a weird wound on the beast, Shia leans in and notices a strange black mist coming off the body, wondering out loud if this is actually the miasma they heard about. She decides she's going to use some purification magic just to be safe. So she stands over the creature and starts her prayer to the goddess Lamlas, closing her eyes as she begins the ritual. She calls for holy power to gather in her hands, asking for a gentle rain of light to wash away all the impurity left behind. And as the light hits the beast, the dark energy finally starts to disappear. Shia and Leold suddenly stop in their tracks. They both spot something through the trees that catches them completely off guard. Shia's eyes go wide as she loses it, asking herself what on earth she's even looking at right now, because right there in the middle of that creepy black mist, a small child is curled up on the dirt. She leans in close to see the kid's face. They look totally out of it, and she can't believe a child is out here alone, so Shia admits she has no clue how this is even possible. But she knows they can't just leave them behind like this. She carefully scoops the kid up and tells Leold it's too dangerous to stay in the woods. They need to get to the village. And Leold agrees they need to move fast, so they start making their way back as the sun begins to set. As the kid is carried away, a bunch of dark, painful memories start bubbling up, meaning the kid is thinking about how he doesn't have a single memory of being loved, just people being mean and rough. And he remembers getting yelled at every day until finally, he was just left completely alone in the world. Luke thinks about how a person with a kind face isn't always actually a good person, and remembers a time he was tricked by sweet talk and almost sold off. So back then he was just doing whatever he could to survive. Sitting up in bed, Luke starts thinking to himself about those rough times, wondering what his value even was and why he spent all those days just crawling through the mud. But his thoughts start to shift as he looks toward the window. He watches from inside as Shia and Leold spend time together out in the yard, and he realizes that everything finally started to make sense after he met Shia. Luke decides that if there is even one person who actually needs him around, then that gives him a real reason to keep on living. Shia gets ready to head out, letting Leold know that she's leaving for now. She asks him to look after Lena while she's gone, as Luke stands nearby watching them. Looking back on his progress, Luke tells himself that he really wants to get strong. Jen listens to him and starts thinking about a good way for the kid to actually improve. The old man suggests that Luke should try picturing an imaginary enemy in his head to fight. Luke takes the advice to heart and immediately pictures Lord Bernard as the one he needs to beat. He thinks about how much has changed since he joined the guild and cut his hair, feeling proud that he even managed to land a solid hit during a practice match with the Knights. Looking at himself in the mirror, he knows it'll be a while before he's as built as Jen, but he's determined to keep going until he can finally land a real blow on Lord Bernard. Luke looks pretty stressed while Sid stands behind him, warning the kid not to get the wrong idea about how things are going. Luke stays quiet for a second, just trying to figure out what the Viscount actually meant by seeing through the situation. The heavy mood breaks when Lena comes running down the hall, shouting that it's finally time for dinner, which snaps Luke back to reality. He quickly agrees and heads over, leaving his worries behind for a bit. As they sit down to eat, Luke watches everyone and promises himself that he's going to become stronger than anyone else. He looks down at his plate and realizes he's finally found a home he wants to protect, no matter what it takes. The next morning rolls around and the sun hits the roof of the house. Luke is already outside and hyped up, telling everyone they need to get moving and start gathering info. Lena is right there with him, ready to help, so they head out into the busy streets to see what they can dig up. While Luke tries talking to a guy nearby to get some leads, Lena suddenly stops and looks back like she noticed something weird. Lena walks up and tugs on Luke's sleeve, quietly trying to get his attention nearby. A knight is talking to a local woman and realizes she's stressed out about the missing kid. The knight pats Lena on the head and tells her everything's fine now that a regional knight is on the case. They'll find the person in no time. As the guy rides off, Luke thinks it's pretty weird that they only sent one person out to look for a lost child. He figures they might just be short-staffed today, but something still feels off about it. A loud scream suddenly rips through the street, making both of them spin around. Luke immediately starts running toward the sound, knowing something is definitely wrong. A woman and kid huddle on the ground as a dark shadow moves in. The two of them look completely terrified while the thick black mist begins to swallow up the area. And Luke can't believe what he's seeing. He stares at the mist as the kid screams for their mom, realizing they're in real trouble. Luke looks on as the dark mist starts to wrap around the mother and child. A massive, creepy eye suddenly opens up within the swirling black smoke. The mother gets grabbed by the dark clouds and pulled into the shadows, and Luke stares at the mess, trying to figure out what this weird power is. He notices something off. The adults are being let go, but the mist is holding on to the kids, so he realizes they need to get the rest of the villagers out of there immediately. Luke tells Lena to find a spot to hide and stay put no matter what happens next. He shouts for everyone else to run for it, promising he'll handle the situation himself, which leaves him standing alone in the middle of the street, facing down the massive cloud. The dark mist just keeps twisting and growing like it's getting ready for something. Out of the mist, this massive bear shows up looking completely ready to kill, and Luke just freezes for a second, totally shocked by the size of the thing. The beast lets out a low growl while Luke tries to keep his cool, and he tells himself it's okay because he's actually gotten way stronger than before. He says he's got this and can definitely protect Lena and the villagers, so he plants his foot and gets ready to make his move right then. Luke lets out a huge yell and swings his blade down at the monster, putting every bit of strength he has into one heavy, desperate strike. He stands there catching his breath and asks if they got him. But then the bear growls again, and Luke realizes his hit didn't even slow it down. Luke notices smoke rising from where the bear's claws hit the ground. Everything it touches starts rotting away right in front of him. Looking at his blade, he's just glad she took the time to reinforce it earlier so it didn't snap immediately. And he remembers that his only goal right now is to buy enough time for the villagers to get out of there safely. He tells himself he has to hold the line no matter what. But then he hears screams coming from the village and looks back to see the massive bear looming over a terrified Lena as she cries out for help. Suddenly he sees black mist rising in other spots and realizes there's more than just one of these things. It hits him that people are screaming all over the place, kids are calling for their moms, while the whole village goes into a panic. Luke feels like he should have seen this coming if he just stopped to think for a second. He looks completely stressed and calls himself a total idiot for not realizing they were being surrounded. He takes a step back, clenching his teeth while trying to figure out how he's supposed to handle all of this at once. Luke spots Lena in the path of the monster and shouts her name. She's frozen in place, looking totally terrified. His eyes go wide as he realizes he's almost out of time, and the sweat starts pouring down his face. It's a do-or-die moment, and Luke tells himself it's all or nothing right now as he prepares to move. He grips his sword and plants his feet. He has to make this count or the village is finished. The monster swings a massive, sharp limb toward Lena and the younger girl while they try to escape. Lena pulls the smaller girl close to protect her, but the shadow of the monster is already right on top of them. Luke catches a glimpse of the strike about to land, and his heart just stops. He screams out Lena's name as a giant, furry hand reaches down to grab both of the girls. The kid looks completely devastated. He can't believe he's watching this happen right in front of him. Without thinking, Luke lunges over the beast's back in a last-ditch effort to stop the attack before it's too late. Luke charges forward and screams at the monster to get out of the way. He's putting everything into this, but the beast is way faster, swinging a massive paw down with enough force to end it all. The blow connects right with Luke's head, and he can't even finish his sentence as the impact sends him reeling. Blood starts pooling everywhere while he tries to whisper Lena's name. Back at the mansion, Sid looks pretty calm while he thinks about how he actually thought he'd win, but he tells himself to stay sharp. He can't afford to misread how bad things are getting. Back in the village, Luke's vision starts to fade out as he realizes he made a massive mistake, and he admits he completely failed to judge his own strength. His body just lies there in the dirt. A bit later, Shia and Leold finally make it back to the scene. Shia looks around and asks what happened to the place, seeing the villagers crying over the bodies left in the middle of the road. Shia and Leold finally find the survivors, and the older woman holding Lena is relieved to see they've returned. Shia runs straight for them, shouting how glad she is that the woman made it through the attack. The woman starts explaining that some kind of black monster showed up out of nowhere, and the news clearly freaks Shia out. But things get worse when the woman mentions the red-haired guy who got taken down while she was hiding inside. Realizing it's Luke, Shia loses it and sprints to the inn, throwing the door open while screaming his name, only to find Luke lying there totally unconscious with bandages wrapped all around his head. She looks down at him, her face full of worry as she tries to process how bad the damage really is. Shia looks up at Leold with tears in her eyes, asking him if Luke is actually going to be okay, and Leold tells her not to worry since he already used a healing spell on the nasty wound Luke took. Everything seems to be settling down for a second, but then Leold suddenly stops and tells her to wait. Shia's heart sinks as she looks around the room, frantically asking where Lena went. She doesn't waste a second screaming Lena's name while she sprints down the stairs to find her. Stopping for a second, she realizes it's weird that everyone else is fine while only Luke has physical wounds. Just then, one of the guys lying there speaks up and gets her attention. He asks her if she's the one traveling with that red-haired guy, and then he tells her that Luke is actually the hero who stepped up and saved his life. The guy explains how these gross monsters started crawling out of a weird black mist, and then he drops the worst news yet, that the little girl with them was swallowed up by that same mist. He looks over at the unconscious Luke and says he tried his best to help, but there was just nothing he could do. The man breaks down on the floor, telling Shia that every single child in the village was taken by the mist. The man finishes his story, explaining how the monster wrecked the village before vanishing into a black mist. Shia is hit with a wave of guilt, thinking she should have just left Lena back in the capital where it was safe. She grips her clothes tight, trying to stop herself from breaking down right then and there, but she quickly snaps out of it, telling herself that sitting around and regretting things won't help anyone. She looks up with a determined face, deciding she needs to do everything she can to make things right. Shia announces to the room that she's a healer and asks how she can help, which surprises the local man. She doesn't wait for an answer, kneeling down by the injured villagers to start her work. The night goes on as she works tirelessly under the moonlight, and eventually morning comes around, lighting up the rooftops of the village after a long, difficult night. Suddenly Leold bursts into the room looking completely panicked, shouting for his master and saying that Luke is. Luke looks up from his bed as Shia enters the room, immediately telling her how sorry he is. He stares off with a hollow look, saying he wasn't able to protect a single thing during the attack. Shia watches him with a worried expression, softly calling out his name while Leold stands by, but she cuts through the gloom, telling him he only gets 1 hour to sit around and feel sorry for himself. She remembers these words from the past, thinking about how the bishop used to say the exact same thing, that an hour is more than enough time for anyone to deal with regret and repentance. She tells Luke that if he has time to pray to the goddess forever, he should just get up and do something. She makes it clear that their next move is to go out there and save Lena together. Shia admits they might be weak on their own and that their individual power might not be enough yet, but she takes his hand and says they'll just have to band together, since being in a guild means they're family.